It was late October when I first started noticing that something was off in the house I had just rented in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio. The house wasn't old by any stretch. Built in the late 90s with the kind of beige siding and white trim you see in countless middle class developments. But there was a stillness about it, almost unnatural, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I had moved in after my divorce, wanting something modest, cheap, and close enough to my job in Columbus that I could commute without hating myself every morning. It seemed perfect at first. 2 floors, 3 bedrooms, a small backyard, and no neighbors who would knock on the door unless it was an emergency. The first night I slept there, I had the usual unease you get when sleeping in a new place, the subtle alertness that comes from being in an unfamiliar space. The wind rattled the window in my bedroom slightly, and I remember thinking how the house would always settle like that, making groans and creaks that sounded exaggerated in the dark. Around 3 in the morning, I woke to the sound of what I thought was scratching at my bedroom door. I remember sitting up, heart thumping, trying to convince myself it was just the house, or maybe a branch hitting the window. I didn't have any pets, and no one else had keys. I turned on the light, half expecting to see a raccoon or maybe a stray cat somehow in the house. Nothing. The door was closed, just as I had left it. I checked the windows. All were locked. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it and went back to bed, but sleep didn't come easily after that. I kept hearing soft, almost imperceptible noises, footsteps in the hall when I was alone, the faint sound of someone breathing when I was in the kitchen. It was always subtle, just barely enough for my brain to register that something was wrong, then fade when I tried to focus. For the next few weeks, I chalked it up to stress. I had a lot on my mind: work, the divorce, the move, and my imagination was fertile territory for paranoia. But then the little things started happening more frequently. At first, it was minor. The TV would be on in the living room when I was certain I had turned it off. Lights would flicker, and doors that I knew I had locked would be slightly ajar. I never saw anyone, but the feeling of being watched became a constant companion. I worked from home 2 or 3 days a week, and one afternoon, while sitting at my desk on the second floor, I heard a thump from the kitchen below. My first thought was that something had fallen, but when I went to check, nothing was out of place. I brushed it off, telling myself I must have misheard something. But then, as I turned to leave the kitchen, I saw it. A shadow. It wasn't attached to anything, not cast by me or the sun or the lights. It moved independently, a black, amorphous figure that seemed to flow across the floor before slipping behind the fridge. I froze, my stomach twisting in panic. I grabbed my phone and flicked on the flashlight app, aiming it where the shadow had disappeared. But there was nothing. Nothing at all. I didn't sleep well that night. I barely slept at all, and when I did, my dreams were twisted and fragmentary. Shapes moving just beyond vision, whispers that promised I wasn't alone, always followed by a sharp jolt awake. I told myself repeatedly that this was psychological, that the stress and loneliness were warping my perception. I wanted to believe that. Then it escalated. One morning, I went to make coffee and noticed something strange on the counter. A handprint in the dust. I don't mean a light smudge. It was a distinct, adult-sized handprint, the lines visible even through the thin layer of dust the previous tenant had left behind. I live alone. I lock all the doors. I don't have anyone over. My first thought was maybe a maintenance worker had come by, but I had the only key and hadn't arranged any service. I wiped it away, thinking nothing more of it at first, until it appeared again the next morning, and the next, always in the same spot. It wasn't just the handprints. Objects began moving. The coffee maker would be on the floor when I swore I had left it on the counter. Kitchen knives shifted slightly in their block, and my shoes often weren't where I left them. Always subtle, always small enough that I questioned myself, doubted my memory. But the feeling of someone, or something, lurking in the house never left. One night I woke to my bedroom door slowly creaking open. I wasn't dreaming. I was awake. My cat, yes, I had finally gotten a cat, a black one named Salem, was asleep on my bed. The door opened inch by inch until I could see the hall beyond. I tried to move, to shout, but my body froze. I don't know if it was fear or shock. A figure stepped through the doorway. It was tall, impossibly thin, and its face was featureless. Just a smooth, pale surface where eyes and mouth should have been. It didn't speak, didn't move in any normal sense. It just glided, and the air around it seemed heavier. I blinked, and it was gone, just like that. No trace, no sound, nothing. I sat there, shaking for hours, thinking maybe I had finally lost it. But Salem stayed crouched on the bed, eyes fixed on the hallway, growling low in a way cats only do when they sense something truly wrong. I decided I couldn't stay there alone anymore. I called a friend, Mark, who lived about 30 minutes away. He insisted on coming over that weekend to check the place out. I didn't tell him everything, just that the house felt off, that I had been hearing things. Mark arrived on a Friday evening, and I was relieved to have someone else there. He joked around at first, brushing it off as my imagination, but when we went upstairs to my bedroom, Salem hissed at the doorway. I laughed nervously. Mark frowned. "What's he seeing?" "I don't know," I said. "Nothing." Then it happened. The air in the room shifted. The lights flickered violently, and in the corner of my bedroom, a shadow condensed. Mark and I both saw it this time. Solid, tall, black, featureless. The thing didn't walk. It seemed to hover, a silent void that absorbed the light. Mark froze, his face paling. "What the hell?" he whispered. Before I could respond, it lunged, or at least it felt like it lunged, and slammed into the wall, making a sound like furniture being smashed. I screamed. Salem hissed and ran under the bed. Mark grabbed me and dragged me out of the room. We didn't speak for several minutes, just stared at the doorway, the hair on our arms standing on end. We need to leave," Mark said finally. "Now." We drove to his place that night, both of us too shaken to speak. I didn't sleep in my house again for almost a week. During that time, I did some research. I looked into the house's history, contacted previous tenants, checked public records. Nothing unusual came up, not at first. It was just a normal suburban home, bought and sold like any other. But then I dug deeper, going back decades. And that's when I found something. The house had been built on the site of an old farmhouse from the early 1900s. Records showed that in 1923, the family living there, 2 adults, 3 children, had died in what was officially ruled a murder-suicide. The father had killed his wife and children before turning the gun on himself. Neighbors at the time claimed it was a cursed place, though the language of old newspapers was always sensationalized. After the tragedy, the land was left vacant for decades before being developed into the subdivision I now lived in. I didn't want to believe it, but it fit. Everything I had experienced, the subtle movements, the shadows, the feeling of being watched, made sense if the house carried some residue from that horror. I knew enough about grief and trauma to understand that energy could linger, especially when something violent and sudden occurred. But knowing didn't make it less terrifying. Determined to take control, I called in a paranormal investigator I found online, someone with references and years of experience. She came by a week later, a middle-aged woman named Denise, who had a calm, no-nonsense demeanor that helped settle my nerves. She spent hours in the house, setting up cameras, EMF detectors, and various sensors. She spoke softly to the house, asking for it to reveal itself, to communicate. At first, nothing happened. But then, late one evening, the cameras picked up movement in the kitchen. The EMF meters spiked. And on the audio recording, there was a whisper, soft, almost indistinct, but it sounded like a child saying, "Don't go." Denise listened carefully, rewound, slowed the audio. "It's warning you," she said. "Something is here. It doesn't want to hurt you. Yet." I didn't stay to test that theory. I left that night, driving to Mark's house in the pouring rain, and I didn't go back for months. When I finally returned, armed with more cameras and a willingness to confront it, I found signs that disturbed me even more than the shadows. My bedroom walls had faint scratches, too high for me to reach. The smell of something faintly metallic and rotting lingered in the air, just barely noticeable but unmistakable. And the handprints, they had returned, but this time there were more, all over the kitchen, the hallway, and even the bathroom mirrors. One night I decided to stay up to watch. I sat in the living room, lights dimmed, cameras rolling. Around midnight I heard it again, soft footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate. I froze, listening as they reached the top, paused outside my bedroom door, then retreated. I held my breath, trying not to move. Then a voice, clear as day, whispered my name, not in my head, out loud in the room. Michael. I bolted upright, and that's when the lights went out completely. Absolute darkness, though the house wasn't supposed to have any power issues. And in that darkness, I felt it. Close, breathing, watching. I couldn't move. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would break my chest. Then slowly a shape emerged from the corner of the room, not shadowy this time, solid. And it smiled, a twisted, hollow grin that seemed to stretch impossibly wide. I ran. I didn't care about cameras, evidence, or anything else. I ran out the front door into the rain, barefoot, and didn't stop until I reached the street. Mark was waiting in his car. I jumped in, shaking uncontrollably. It's inside, I said between sobs. It's in the house. I can't. I never returned to that house. I broke the lease, left everything behind, and moved far away. Friends who have visited my old neighborhood say the house still looks normal, clean, mundane. But I don't doubt for a second that it isn't. There were times when I think I almost saw it outside, waiting, watching, patient. I don't know if it's attached to the land, the house, or me. All I know is that every so often I'll get a phone call or hear a sound outside my new apartment window, and my stomach will twist in the same old fear. Years have passed, but I still dream about it sometimes. I hear footsteps in my dreams, and a whisper calls my name. And every time I wake up, I check the locks, the windows, and even the corners of my room, half expecting to see a tall, thin figure with a smooth, pale face staring back at me. I know this sounds insane. I know most people will dismiss it as imagination or coincidence. But I can't. I felt it. I heard it. I saw it. And if you ever move into a house with a dark past, one where tragedy occurred and the land itself seems to remember, be careful. The quietest, most ordinary houses can hide the worst things. They can watch. They can wait. And sometimes, just sometimes, they can follow you, far beyond the walls that once contained them. I've tried to move on, tried to convince myself it was all a mental projection, but every time I hear a floorboard creak in an empty apartment or a shadow flickers just outside my vision, I remember. I remember the black void that didn't belong, the whispers that weren't human, the hands that left prints in the dust as if marking territory, claiming me. I don't know why it targeted me or if it's still waiting, but I know one thing with absolute certainty: I will never, ever live alone again. Story, the end. It was one of those nights in late October when the wind cut sharper than usual and the streetlights flickered like they were trying to warn someone. I had just moved into a small rental house on the outskirts of a town in upstate New York. The place was old, built sometime in the 1920s, with creaky wooden floors and a basement that smelled faintly of mildew. It had been cheap, and I didn't care much about aesthetics. I just needed a place to live while I got on my feet after a rough breakup and quitting my old job in the city. From the very first night, the house gave me an uneasy feeling. I remember setting down my bags and sitting on the sagging couch in the living room, listening to the wind whistle through cracks in the window frames. The house was silent, except for the occasional groan of the wood settling and the hum of the heating system. I tried to shake off the feeling as just nerves or fatigue, but there was something about the way the shadows moved that night, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I had just gotten home from a late shift at a small diner in town. The drive there had been uneventful, empty roads, the kind that make you aware of how isolated you are. By the time I got in, it was past midnight. I turned on a single lamp in the living room and went into the kitchen to make a cup of tea. That's when I first heard it, a faint tapping sound like someone lightly drumming on a wooden surface. I froze, straining to listen. It came from the basement. I told myself it was probably the house settling, or maybe a branch hitting the siding, but the sound was too rhythmic, too deliberate. I set down my cup and walked to the basement door, my hand hovering over the doorknob. The basement was unfinished, dark, with only a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. I flipped the switch and the bulb flickered to life, casting weak light that barely illuminated the room. There was nothing there, just the old furnace, some boxes, and cobwebs. I laughed nervously at myself and went back upstairs. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every creak, every groan made me jump. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of whispering. It wasn't loud, just soft murmurs, almost like a conversation taking place right outside my bedroom door. I sat up in bed, straining to hear. My apartment was empty. I live alone. The whispers stopped as suddenly as they started. My heart was racing. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was overtired. But the sense of being watched lingered, heavy and oppressive. Over the next few days, things got worse. Objects would be moved. Small things at first, like a pen on the table or a book on the counter, but gradually it escalated. One morning, I woke up to find all the knives in the kitchen drawer arranged in a perfect line, their blades pointing the same way. I lived alone. I hadn't touched them. I started noticing shadows at the corner of my vision, shapes that seemed human but vanished when I looked directly. I would hear my name whispered softly when no one was around. At first, I tried to rationalize everything, but I was becoming more tense, more on edge with each passing day. I started sleeping with the lights on, but that didn't help. The whispers became clearer at night, sometimes almost intelligible, like someone was speaking directly to me but just beyond the threshold of hearing. It wasn't until a weekend that I saw it, or them. I woke up at about 2 a.m. to the feeling of someone standing at the foot of my bed. My eyes were open, but the room was dim and empty, or so I thought. Then I noticed the faint outline of a figure, tall, shadowy, with no distinguishable features. It was just standing there, unmoving. I froze. My breathing hitched. It didn't vanish. It just lingered. A presence so heavy I could feel it pressing down on me. I blinked, and it was gone. After that night, I barely slept. I stopped going out except for work, and I started carrying a flashlight around the house. I recorded the sounds I heard, hoping to catch something on tape, but the recordings would always play back silence, just static when the whispering had been clearest. I confided in a friend from work who suggested I might be stressed, overworked, and living alone. I wanted to believe that, but every instinct in me said otherwise. Something in that house didn't want me there, and it was showing itself more openly now. One evening, after a long shift, I came home to find the living room furniture rearranged in a strange, deliberate pattern. The couch was facing the wall, chairs turned inward as if in a meeting, and the rug was twisted so that it looked like a symbol I didn't recognize. My first thought was that someone had broken in, but there were no signs of forced entry. No broken locks, no footprints, nothing. I checked all the doors and windows again. Everything was locked, exactly as I had left it. That night, I heard scratching at the walls, faint but insistent, like claws trying to break through plaster. It moved from room to room, circling the house. I stayed in my bedroom, flashlight in hand, until dawn. I called the police once, explaining that someone was inside. They came, checked the house, and left, saying they found nothing. But I knew it was there. Things escalated after that. I started waking up to cold spots in the middle of the night, areas of the house where the temperature would drop sharply, like someone had opened a door to the other side of the world. One night, I woke to see a small child standing at the top of the stairs. I gasped, and it vanished instantly. I ran to the stairs, calling out, but there was no one. I started keeping a journal, noting every event, every sound, every shadow. Patterns began to emerge. The phenomena weren't random. They followed me. They started at night, often around 2 a.m., and escalated in intensity. Objects would move, doors would slam, whispers would call my name. I started hearing breathing where there should be none. One night, the whispers spoke clearly. "You don't belong here." I started researching the house's history. I found records indicating that it had been the site of several strange incidents over the decades. Previous tenants had left abruptly, some citing mental breakdowns, others claiming the house was alive in some way. One record mentioned a child who had died in the basement in the 1940s, though the details were sparse. It seemed the house had a history, a memory of violence and loss, and now it had focused its attention on me. I tried everything to get rid of it: salt lines, sage, even a priest's blessing. Nothing worked. The house ignored me at first, then became more aggressive. It started locking doors from the inside, making it impossible to leave certain rooms without a struggle. Windows would slam open and shut, and I would hear footsteps following me even when I was alone. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow, but even that felt futile. The most terrifying night came about 3 weeks after I moved in. I had been at work, a long closing shift, and returned around 1 a.m. The house was silent when I walked in. I set down my keys, exhausted, and went to the living room to turn on the lights. That's when I noticed something I hadn't before. The reflection in the large mirror by the staircase was wrong. My reflection wasn't alone. Behind me in the mirror was a tall, faceless figure. I spun around, but the room was empty. I looked back at the mirror. It was still there, moving slightly, shifting closer to me in the reflection, even though there was nothing in the room. I ran upstairs and locked myself in the bedroom, phone in hand. I called a friend, voice shaking, explaining what I had seen. She told me to leave immediately, but I was frozen with fear. And then I heard it, scratching at my bedroom door. Slow, deliberate. A voice, low and guttural, whispered, "You can't leave." I don't remember how long I stayed awake that night, listening to the scratching, the whispers, the movement. Morning came, and the house was silent. I called a real estate agent, demanding to break my lease. I packed what I could and left, never looking back. Years later, I learned that the house had been demolished. Developers had bought it and torn it down to build condos. I often wonder what happened to whatever was in that house. Was it tied to the land, the building itself, or the tragedies that occurred there? I don't know. I do know, though, that the memories of that place, the feeling of being watched, the whispers in the dark, still haunt me. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in a hotel room or a rental, I swear I hear faint scratching and a voice whispering my name. It's hard to explain to anyone who hasn't experienced it. You think you're alone, but you're not. Something can be in the room with you, something that isn't alive in any way you recognize, something that watches, waits, and reminds you that you're never truly alone. I never returned to that town, never even drove through it. But the fear follows. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I can hear that faint tapping, that whispering, just on the edge of hearing. I've read all the rational explanations: sleep paralysis, overactive imagination, the brain playing tricks. But I know what I experienced, what I lived through. There's a presence in the world, one that is patient and deliberate, that targets you when you are isolated, vulnerable. It doesn't need a reason. It just exists to terrify. And if you ever feel that cold touch or hear your name whispered when you are alone, don't dismiss it. Run. Because whatever it is, it doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive. And it waits. Even now, years later, I check the locks twice before bed. I never sleep with the lights off, and I never ever walk down a dark basement alone. I sometimes think about the house, about the faceless figure in the mirror, about the child in the basement, and I shiver. I can still hear it if I listen hard enough. The whispering, the scratching, the movement just beyond sight. And I know somewhere it still waits. Not for me, perhaps, but for the next person foolish enough to think they are safe in an empty house at night. I tell people this story, hoping it might serve as a warning. They nod politely, smile, and go back to their safe, quiet lives. But I know the truth. The world is filled with places like that house, places that remember, that watch, that wait. And when you find yourself alone in the dark, in a quiet house, that's when you realize the most terrifying truth. It is not the darkness that is dangerous. It is what lurks within it, waiting for you to notice. I never saw it again after I left, but I never needed to. The fear never left. It had gotten under my skin, settled into my mind, a constant shadow at the edge of perception. Sometimes in the dead of night, I wake to find objects moved slightly from where I left them. Sometimes I hear faint whispering that makes the hair on my arms stand up. And always, just always, there is the sense of being watched. No one else can see it, and no one else can hear it. But I can. And that is more than enough. I still live in America, in a different town, far from that house. I rent a modern apartment, nothing old, nothing with a history. And yet I can't shake the memories. Every creak, every sudden chill, every whisper at the edge of hearing sends me back to that house, back to the basement, back to the faceless figure in the mirror. I know the world is full of people who don't believe in the supernatural, who dismiss experiences like mine as hysteria or mental breakdown. But they don't know what it's like to feel a presence in the room, to hear a name whispered when no one else is there, to wake in the middle of the night and feel the cold weight of something watching you, patient, deliberate, waiting. I have told this story to a few people over the years, those I trust enough to not laugh. And when I do, I see it in their eyes. The tiny flicker of fear, the recognition that perhaps there are things in the world we are not meant to understand. I am careful now. Careful with where I go, careful with what I do at night, careful with how I live alone. Because I know the truth. There is a world beyond what we can see, a presence that exists in the shadows, waiting for the next person who is vulnerable, who is alone, who doesn't realize the danger until it is too late. I survived, but only barely. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls outside and the shadows stretch across the walls, I can feel it again, as if the house, or whatever it was, still remembers me, still waits. And I know that the fear, once planted, never truly leaves. It lingers, quiet but persistent, in the corners of the mind and the edges of perception. Story the end. It was late September when I moved into the small duplex on the edge of town. The rent was cheap, too cheap for the size of the place, but at the time, I didn't think much of it. I had just gone through a messy breakup and needed space away from everyone. So when the landlord showed me the house, 2 bedrooms, a narrow living room, and an outdated kitchen tucked into the back, I signed the lease without hesitation. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where you saw the same dog walkers every evening, and where porch lights flickered on at exactly the same time as the sun sank behind the trees. The first week was uneventful. I worked during the day and came home to unpack boxes at night. The duplex shared a thin wall with the unit next door, but the adjoining side seemed unoccupied. No lights, no movement, no sounds. The landlord mentioned someone lived there but traveled for work a lot, so I didn't expect to see them often. That suited me fine. I wanted silence, a reset. But the silence began to feel heavy after a few nights. I'd be sitting on the couch and catch myself holding my breath, straining my ears for something, anything. Then, faintly, I started to hear it. The sound of pacing. Not constant, but enough to catch my attention. Heavy steps across the floor, slow, deliberate. At first, I dismissed it. Thin walls, old building, sounds carried. Maybe the neighbor had come home without me noticing, but it became a pattern. Always late at night, never during the day. Between midnight and 2 in the morning, the pacing started. I'd hear it through the wall when I lay in bed, a steady rhythm that sometimes stopped right at the shared wall, as if whoever it was had paused to listen. The duplex next door still looked vacant. No car in the driveway, no lights. I'd glance out my window and see nothing but the dark outline of the house against the street lamp glow. One night, around 1:30 a.m., I got out of bed and pressed my ear to the wall. The footsteps stopped. I stayed there, heart pounding, waiting. After a few seconds, there was a knock. 3 slow knocks, right against the other side of the wall, at the exact spot where my ear was pressed. I jumped back and nearly tripped over the nightstand. My skin prickled, and I stood frozen, staring at the blank wall like it might move. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I called the landlord. He sounded annoyed, but confirmed that yes, someone did rent the other side. A man in his 40s, quiet, worked out of state a lot. He said it wasn't unusual for him to be gone for weeks at a time. I asked if he was home now, and the landlord hesitated before saying he didn't think so. I asked if anyone else had keys to that side, and he got defensive, telling me no one did, and that I shouldn't worry myself over neighborly noise. That day, I decided to test it. I kept my blinds cracked in the front window and watched. Evening came and went, and the place next door stayed dark. No car, no lights, no movement. Midnight rolled around, and right on cue, the pacing started. My chest tightened as I listened, counting the steps. I grabbed my phone and recorded a few minutes of the sound. In the recording, you could clearly hear the footsteps moving back and forth. Then, in the last 10 seconds, there was a dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. The following day, I showed the recording to my coworker, a woman named Dana, who lived a few blocks away. She frowned as she listened and asked if I'd considered calling the police. I felt ridiculous, like I'd be wasting their time over noises through a wall. But she looked at me seriously and said, "That doesn't sound like someone just walking around. That sounds off." That night, I stayed up, determined to catch more. I turned off every light in my house and sat on the couch with the blinds slightly open. Around 12:40, I saw something move in the window of the other unit. Not a light, just the faintest suggestion of a shape crossing past. My blood ran cold. The footsteps began again, slow and steady. My phone trembled in my hand as I hit record. This time, I heard something new. Along with the pacing, there was a faint rhythmic thumping, like someone hitting the wall at regular intervals. Not hard, but deliberate. Then the dragging sound again, closer, like it was right up against the wall, separating us. I held my breath as it stopped. Then came the knock. 3 knocks. This time it echoed deeper, heavier, as if whatever was knocking had weight behind it. I couldn't take it anymore. I called the landlord again, voice shaking. I told him I was hearing things every night, that someone was in there. He got irritated and said, "Look, the place is locked up. If it makes you feel better, I'll check it this weekend." But nobody's there right now. That night, I barely slept. When I did drift off, I woke to a sound that still chills me when I think about it. A whisper. Through the wall, right by my bed. I couldn't make out the words, but it was low and drawn out, like someone murmuring directly into my ear. I bolted upright and turned on every light in the house. The whisper stopped, but I could feel something watching me, waiting. By Friday, I was on edge. I kept telling myself I was imagining things, but the exhaustion was getting to me. That night, Dana came over after work. I didn't tell her everything, just that I wanted her to hear, for herself. We stayed up until 1 in the morning, drinking coffee and listening. At first, nothing happened. Then the pacing began. Dana froze, her mug halfway to her lips. "Holy shit," she whispered. "That's not the house settling. That's footsteps." We both leaned closer to the wall. The pacing grew louder, heavier, until it stopped right where we sat. Dana's eyes widened, and I shook my head, urging her to stay quiet. Then came the knock. 3 heavy knocks, so loud we both jumped. Dana grabbed my arm. "That's not normal. Call the cops." I did. I called the non-emergency line and explained the situation. Noises in the vacant unit next door, someone possibly trespassing. 2 officers showed up about 20 minutes later. We explained, showed them the recording, and they agreed to check it out. Dana and I stood outside while they unlocked the door to the other unit. They were inside for maybe 10 minutes. When they came back out, their expressions were unreadable. One of them just said, "Nobody's in there." Place is empty. I asked if they heard anything, and they both shook their heads. It's clean, locked up. Could be animals in the walls. Old buildings make noise. You're safe. But I didn't feel safe. After they left, Dana stayed with me a while longer, but eventually she went home. I tried to sleep, lights on, door locked, every muscle in my body tense. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. I sat up, heart in my throat, and saw the door slowly swing inward. No footsteps this time, no pacing. Just the door moving, inch by inch, until it stopped wide open. I couldn't move. I sat there frozen, staring at the dark doorway. Then, faintly, from the other side of the wall, I heard it. The whisper again. This time I could make out the words. "I see you." The rest of the night is a blur. I remember shaking, gripping the blanket, staring into the darkness until morning finally came. The landlord came by that afternoon like he promised. I told him everything. Footsteps, knocking, whispers, the door. He looked irritated, like I was wasting his time, but he went next door with me following. The place was empty, completely empty. No furniture, no belongings, dust coated the floors, undisturbed. The air felt cold, stale, wrong. "See?" he said. "Nothing here. You need to relax." But as he spoke, I noticed something. In the dust on the floor, faint but visible, were footprints, bare feet. They started in the middle of the room and led right up to the shared wall, stopping directly where my bed sat on the other side. I didn't say a word. I just stared at those prints until my vision blurred. That night, I packed a bag and left. I didn't even last the full month on the lease. I still don't know what was in that duplex. I don't want to know. But sometimes, late at night in my new apartment, when the world is quiet and I'm lying awake, I swear I can still hear it. 3 knocks against the wall. Story the end. It was early October in rural Pennsylvania when Emily moved into the old farmhouse she had inherited from her grandmother. The house was a sprawling 2-story structure sitting on 10 acres of overgrown land, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to press in closer as night fell. Emily had spent much of her childhood summers here, but it had been years since anyone lived in the house. Her grandmother had passed away quietly in her sleep, leaving Emily the property with little explanation, aside from a brief note that simply said, "Take care of it." The first night was uneventful, save for the sounds of creaking floorboards and the occasional gust of wind rattling the old windows. Emily had brought a box of candles and a small lamp to light the rooms, as the electrical wiring was unreliable at best. She unpacked her things slowly, finding comfort in familiar routines, folding her clothes, arranging her books, and setting out the few photographs she had of her grandmother. By 10 o'clock, she was exhausted and fell asleep in the old four-poster bed that had once belonged to her grandmother. Around 3 in the morning, Emily woke to a soft scratching noise coming from the living room. She froze, straining to hear over her own heartbeat. The sound was faint, almost like someone dragging a fingernail across wood. She convinced herself it was just the house settling. The farmhouse was old. It made noises at night, creaks and groans that could sound like footsteps if your mind played tricks on you. She tried to ignore it, turned onto her side, and closed her eyes. But the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, closer, until it became unmistakable. Footsteps pacing across the living room floor. Emily's throat went dry. She told herself it was impossible. The house was miles from the nearest neighbor. No one could be inside. She wrapped the blanket around her tightly, the sound of her own breathing now deafening in the silence. Then she heard the unmistakable sound of the front door creaking open. Her heart pounded in her chest as she got out of bed, careful not to make a sound. She crept toward the top of the staircase, peering down into the dimly lit living room. The door was slowly swinging shut, even though she hadn't heard it latch. Emily's hand shook as she reached for the light switch, only to realize the lights didn't work. She whispered her grandmother's name, though she knew it was futile. The air felt heavier, charged with something unseen. For the next few nights, the noises persisted. Footsteps, doors opening and closing, objects shifting slightly when she wasn't looking. At first, Emily tried to rationalize it. Old houses had drafts. Her imagination could be running wild. But then she started noticing things that couldn't be explained away. A chair would be facing a different direction in the morning. Her grandmother's old quilt, folded neatly on the bed one night, would be draped across the floor the next. Sometimes she would wake to the smell of cigarette smoke in the air, even though she had never smoked in the house. One night, she woke to the sound of whispering. It was soft, indistinct, almost like it was coming from every corner of the room at once. Emily froze, straining to make out the words. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, and suddenly she could hear her name being called. Emily. Emily. The voice was familiar, but distorted, hollow. She ran to the phone to call her friend, but the line was dead. When she tried to leave the room, she felt a pressure against her chest, as if someone invisible was holding her down. She screamed and pulled herself free, running to the door and bolting it behind her. By the following week, Emily began sleeping with the lights on, though she often woke to find them switched off. She installed a camera in the living room, hoping to catch some rational explanation, a stray animal, maybe, or a faulty draft. She reviewed the footage the next morning and nearly dropped the laptop in shock. The video showed nothing unusual at first. Then, at exactly 3:15 in the morning, a shadow moved across the room. It wasn't human. It was tall and thin, with limbs that seemed too long, bending in ways that were unnatural. The shadow didn't walk. It glided. And then, just before the video ended, it paused in front of the camera and tilted its head, as if studying her. Emily stopped sleeping. She spent nights sitting in the kitchen with the lights on, clutching a knife she had found in the drawer. Every sound made her jump. Sometimes she would see a figure in the corner of her eye, always at the edge of her vision. When she turned her head, it would vanish. She called local authorities, but they found nothing. The house appeared abandoned, empty, quiet. Her friends thought she was exaggerating, or worse, imagining things. But Emily knew what she saw. One particularly stormy night, Emily was jolted awake by a loud bang from upstairs. She grabbed a flashlight and slowly climbed the staircase, heart hammering. The hallway was pitch black, illuminated only by the intermittent flashes of lightning. She reached the master bedroom and froze. The window was open, even though she had locked it. Rain poured in, soaking the carpet, and in the corner of the room she saw it. A figure, hunched over, its face hidden under a hood. The figure didn't move at first. Emily's voice shook as she demanded it leave. The figure lifted its head. Its face was pale, almost translucent, with hollow eyes that seemed to look straight through her. Emily ran, slipping in the rain, and didn't stop until she reached her car. She drove into town, soaked and shivering, and spent the night at a motel. The next day, she called a local priest, desperate for guidance. He agreed to visit, saying he had performed blessings at houses before, but when he arrived, he refused to enter. "There's something here," he said, "something old. I can feel it from the porch." He sprinkled holy water at the doorway and muttered prayers, but Emily felt no change. Days passed. Emily returned to the house during the daylight, trying to convince herself it was safer when the sun was out. But even then, she felt the presence. Shadows moved where there shouldn't be shadows. Cold spots followed her through rooms. And she started finding things she hadn't touched. Scraps of paper with strange symbols, drawings etched into the wooden walls, marks that looked like claw scratches. She never remembered doing them. One afternoon, she discovered her grandmother's old diary in the attic. Emily hadn't realized it was missing. She flipped through the pages, expecting the usual accounts of farm life and family stories, but instead, she found entries that made her blood run cold. Her grandmother had written about something that lived in the house, something that came out at night. She described strange noises, shadows, and the sensation of being watched. One entry ended abruptly, smeared with what looked like blood. "It knows me. It waits. I don't think I can stay. I think it wants me gone." That night, the house seemed to breathe. Every room felt alive, pulsing with an unseen presence. Emily barricaded herself in the kitchen, clutching the knife. Around midnight, the whispering returned, louder this time, voices overlapping, speaking in a language she didn't understand. They were angry, pleading, mocking, and then she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps descending the staircase. Slow, deliberate. Emily backed against the wall, shining her flashlight down the hall. She saw a figure at the bottom of the stairs, taller than any human, its limbs bending at impossible angles. Its face was obscured, but she could feel its gaze. The air grew heavy, each breath a struggle. She swung the knife, but it passed through empty air, as if the figure was not fully there. It moved closer, and Emily could hear it whisper, now in clear English, "You shouldn't be here." She screamed, fleeing through the back door into the woods. Rain soaked her to the bone, and she didn't stop running until she reached the main road. She was picked up by a passing driver who didn't question her frantic, drenched appearance. Emily never returned to the house after that night. Weeks later, she learned from the town's historical society that the farmhouse had a dark past. In the 1800s, it had been the site of several gruesome deaths, including a fire that claimed the lives of a family of 6. Locals spoke in hushed tones about the land itself being cursed, a place where spirits lingered, unable or unwilling to move on. Emily realized that what she had experienced wasn't just random hauntings. It was a deep, malevolent presence tied to the very soil and structure of the house. Even now, years later, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that it followed her. Sometimes, in the quiet moments at her apartment in the city, she would hear whispering, soft but insistent. Shadows would flicker at the edge of her vision, and she would feel the same cold, heavy presence she had felt in the farmhouse. The world beyond the old Pennsylvania woods seemed indifferent to it, but Emily knew better. She never told anyone the full story. People might think her imagination had gotten the better of her, or that she was just traumatized by inheriting a decrepit house. But she knew the truth. Some things are tied to places, to houses, to objects, and when they want something, they will wait. Patiently, relentlessly. And Emily knew that one day it might find a way to reach her again, no matter how far she ran. To this day, she keeps a small charm from her grandmother's belongings by her bed, a talisman she hopes will offer some protection. It hasn't stopped the whispers entirely, and on nights when the wind is just right, she swears she can hear the floorboards of a house she no longer owns creaking in time with her heartbeat. Some nights she dreams of the farmhouse, standing silent among the trees, its windows dark but somehow watching, and in those dreams she feels that presence, patient and waiting, knowing that it isn't finished with her yet. She wakes in a cold sweat, convinced she will never be safe, because some things don't stay in one place. They follow, lurking just beyond sight, waiting for the moment they can step out of the shadows once more. The last she heard, the house was still empty, slowly decaying under the weight of its history. Neighbors occasionally reported hearing strange noises or seeing flickering lights in the windows, but no one stayed long enough to investigate. Emily sometimes wonders if it waits for someone new, someone who will unknowingly trespass into its world. She shudders at the thought, knowing she came dangerously close to becoming another entry in the house's long, dark story. No matter where she goes, she carries it with her, the memory, the fear, the certainty that some things are eternal. The farmhouse may stand abandoned, but its presence remains alive, patient, watching, waiting. Emily knows that for some horrors, running isn't enough. They follow, they linger, and they remember. And the house in Pennsylvania is one of them. Story the end. It was around late October when everything started. The kind of cool, dry air that always seems to creep in before Halloween. I was 23 at the time, still figuring out life, living in a small, worn-down apartment complex on the outskirts of Indianapolis. The building itself had that gray, tired look, the kind of place you knew had too many tenants over the years and too many stories that nobody wanted to talk about. The rent was cheap, and that's why I was there. Cheap rent is rarely ever a good sign, but at that age, I wasn't thinking much about signs. I just needed a roof and somewhere close enough to work. I worked nights, stocking at a warehouse just off the interstate. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. That meant most days I'd get home around 3 or 4 in the morning, exhausted, body aching, just wanting to crash. That's when things usually felt the strangest. Those hours between 3 and 5, we stay when the world feels empty, and the silence inside that apartment felt heavier than anything I'd ever known. At first, it was little things. I'd come home, drop my keys on the counter, go to bed, and then wake up to find them somewhere else. I chalked it up to being overtired. I mean, I was constantly exhausted, so it made sense that I just didn't remember moving them. But then it wasn't just the keys. My phone charger would be unplugged, my jacket that I'd tossed on the chair would be on the floor, and once a glass from the sink was sitting neatly on the kitchen table. I didn't think much of it beyond being annoyed at myself for being so careless. But one night, I came home and walked into the kitchen, and there was this weird, sharp smell in the air. It wasn't quite smoke, but it wasn't anything I recognized either, almost like something metallic burning. The window above the sink was cracked open a little, and I never left windows open. The lock looked bent, like someone had forced it. My chest tightened. I did what anyone would do. I grabbed the biggest knife from the drawer and searched the whole apartment. Room by room, closet by closet, under the bed, nothing. I tried to convince myself maybe the lock had just been old and faulty, but I couldn't shake the smell. That night I didn't sleep. I left the lights on and just sat there listening to the building creak. Every sound made me jump, and I kept glancing at the window like something was going to push it open again. Around 5 in the morning, I finally dozed off on the couch. When I woke up a couple hours later, the knife I had left on the coffee table was gone. I tore the place apart. Checked under the couch, under the cushions, in the kitchen, everywhere. Gone. That was the first time I thought maybe someone else was inside with me, but I had no proof. No forced door, nothing taken. Just missing. It only escalated from there. About a week later, after another long shift, I was fumbling with my keys at the front door when I noticed my doormat was turned upside down. I always kept it the same way, the welcome printed clear as day, but now it was flipped backward. I froze, my key halfway in the lock. It wasn't the kind of thing you just do by accident. I opened the door, my heart hammering. Everything looked fine. Too fine. I set my bag down and went into the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and when I looked up into the mirror, I saw it. On the foggy part of the glass from my earlier shower, there were finger streaks. 4 long streaks, like someone had dragged their hand down the mirror. But I hadn't touched it. I stopped breathing for a moment. I walked backward out of the bathroom and just stood in the hall, listening. Nothing but the hum of the fridge and the faint traffic outside. I went to bed with my shoes on that night, knife from the kitchen clutched in my hand, since the other one was still missing. Then came the knocking. At first, it was soft. Around 3:30, I just started drifting off when there was this faint tap at the door. 3 knocks. I sat up, heart racing. I didn't move. Then again, 3 knocks, slightly louder. My phone showed 3:41 a.m. I tiptoed to the peephole, half expecting some drunk neighbor. The hallway was empty. Just that flickering yellow light above the stairwell. I stayed up all night, wide-eyed, waiting for it again, but nothing came. The next night, though, it happened again. This time it was louder, more insistent. I didn't answer, didn't even get close to the door. But when I finally looked out through the peephole, the doormat was flipped back the right way. I called the landlord the next day, told him about the lock, the noises, the knocking. He gave me a tired look, said something about college kids messing around, said I shouldn't worry. But when I pressed him about the bent lock, he shifted uncomfortably and told me these buildings were old, the windows warped, things like that happened. His tone made it clear the conversation was over. So I bought my own little battery-powered security camera and stuck it in the corner of the living room, angled toward the front door. I figured maybe I'd finally get proof of what was happening. The first night, nothing. The second night, around the same time as before, there were the knocks again, this time louder, almost like someone pounding. I sat frozen, staring at the door. After what felt like forever, it stopped. The next morning, I checked the camera footage. My stomach dropped. At 3:42 a.m., the camera picked up motion. I watched, my mouth dry as the door handle began to jiggle. Slow at first, then more forcefully until it stopped. After a few seconds, the camera caught a shadow moving across the thin strip of light under the door. Someone was standing out there. But here's what froze me to my core. The footage glitched, just for a second, and in that brief flash, I swear I saw a face pressed against the peephole. Not a normal face. Eyes wide, mouth stretched into this unnatural grin. And then it was gone. I didn't sleep for 2 days. I thought about calling the cops, but what would I say? Someone knocked on my door and maybe smiled at my peephole? They'd laugh me off. I started sleeping at a friend's place on my nights off just to get rest, but eventually I had to go back. Rent was due, work was close, and I couldn't live out of a bag forever. That's when the dreams started. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, convinced someone was standing over me. In the dreams, it was always the same. I'd open my eyes, and there'd be a figure crouched in the corner of my room, just watching. Not moving, not breathing, just watching. The second I tried to move, it would crawl toward me, fast, too fast, and I'd jolt awake, gasping for air. Then one night, it wasn't a dream. I woke up, rolled over, and in the glow of the streetlight outside my window, I saw something crouched at the end of the bed. My body locked. It wasn't a full figure, more like a shadow, darker than the rest of the room. My brain screamed to move, but I couldn't. I blinked once, twice, and when my eyes adjusted, it was gone. I sat up, shaking, knife in hand, and turned on every light in the apartment. Nothing. But the sheets at the end of my bed were crumpled, like something had been sitting there. That was the night I decided I couldn't stay anymore. I packed a bag, called in sick to work, and went to crash at my brother's place across town. The next day, when I went back to grab the rest of my stuff, the apartment door was already unlocked. Inside, everything was in disarray. Not trashed, not broken, just moved. My couch was at a slight angle. The bathroom mirror was shattered glass littering the sink, and on the wall above my bed, written in something dark and smeared, were the words, "I was here." The smell hit me again, the metallic burning smell from before. It clung to the walls, to my clothes, to everything. I grabbed what I could carry and never looked back. For weeks after, even at my brother's, I felt watched. Doors creaked open at night. I'd wake up to that same smell faint in the air, and once I found my missing kitchen knife leaning against the wall in the hallway outside his apartment. I don't know who or what was in that place, but I know this much. Sometimes cheap rent costs more than you can imagine. Story the end. When I was 19, I moved out of my parents' house in Ohio and drove across the country to stay with my cousin Mark in Oregon. He had a small 2-bedroom house he'd inherited from his grandparents, and he'd offered me the extra room while I figured out what I wanted to do with my life. At the time, it seemed like the perfect setup. Free rent, family nearby, and a chance to get out of the suffocating small town I'd grown up in. The house was in a quiet neighborhood, a mix of older ranch-style homes and newer constructions. Mark's place had that lived-in smell of an older house, dust mixed with faint mildew, but it was solid and cozy enough. He worked long hours at a warehouse, and most days I had the place to myself. I thought it would be peaceful. I didn't know how wrong I was. The first few weeks were uneventful. I spent my time unpacking, job hunting, and wandering the town. But almost immediately, I started to feel uneasy in the house, like I was being watched. At first, I chalked it up to being in an unfamiliar environment, but soon little things began happening that I couldn't explain. The first incident happened one evening while Mark was at work. I was in the kitchen, microwaving leftovers, when I heard the distinct creak of the back door opening. I froze. The sound was unmistakable, the slow squeak of hinges that needed oiling. I grabbed a knife from the counter, my heart pounding, and tiptoed to the back of the house. The door was shut tight, locked from the inside. I told myself maybe it had just been the house settling, but I couldn't shake the sound. A few nights later, I woke around 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. They were soft, deliberate, like someone trying not to be heard. I sat up, straining my ears. The footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom door. My breath caught in my throat. I waited. Every muscle tense, but the door never opened. After what felt like forever, the sound receded, like whoever or whatever was there had walked away. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I told Mark about it the next day. He shrugged and said, "Yeah, this house is old. Makes all kinds of noises. Don't worry about it." He wasn't concerned, but I could tell he was brushing it off more for my sake than his own. His eyes flickered when I mentioned the footsteps. Weeks passed and the activity escalated. Objects would move when I wasn't looking. I'd leave my phone on the nightstand and find it on the dresser across the room. The TV would turn on by itself, static blaring. One morning, I walked into the kitchen to find all the cabinets open, every single one, like someone had been frantically searching for something. The scariest part was the whispers. They started faintly, so soft I thought it was my imagination. I'd be in the living room, and I'd hear what sounded like two people murmuring in another room. I could never make out the words, but the tone was urgent, almost angry. Sometimes the whispers seemed to come from right behind me. Each time I'd spin around, and of course, no one was there. Mark never admitted experiencing the same things, but I could tell something was off with him too. He started staying out later than usual, finding excuses not to be in the house. When he was home, he was jumpy, glancing over his shoulder constantly. One night, things came to a head. Mark was working late again, and I was alone in the living room, scrolling through my phone. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement in the hallway. I looked up and saw a shadow, tall, human-shaped, standing just outside the glow of the lamp. It wasn't Mark. It was too tall, too thin, and it seemed to ripple like smoke. I froze. My instinct was to run, but my body wouldn't move. The shadow drifted closer, silent, until it was at the edge of the living room. That's when I heard it whisper my name. Not just a sound. It was clear, drawn out, like a hiss. I bolted. I ran out the front door, barefoot, into the cold night. I didn't stop until I was halfway down the street. When I finally worked up the courage to go back, Mark was pulling into the driveway. I must have looked wild because he jumped out of his car and grabbed my shoulders. I told him everything. The shadow, the voice, all of it. For the first time, he didn't brush me off. His face went pale and he said quietly, "You saw it too." That's when he told me the truth. He said he'd been seeing shadows since he was a kid, especially in that house. His grandparents had mentioned strange things too, but no one talked about it openly. He admitted that sometimes he woke up in the middle of the night to see figures standing at the foot of his bed. He'd learned to ignore it, hoping that if he didn't acknowledge them, they'd leave him alone. But they never did. After that night, neither of us could deny what was happening. The activity only grew worse. We'd both hear footsteps pacing the halls. Doors slammed on their own. The air in the house grew heavy, suffocating like a constant pressure on our chests. One night, I woke to find my bedroom door wide open. I always closed it before bed. At the foot of my bed stood that same tall shadow. Its head tilted unnaturally, like it was studying me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then it leaned closer, and I swear I felt its cold breath on my face. That broke whatever hold it had, and I screamed. Mark came running, but of course, the thing was gone. We tried everything, burning sage, praying, even staying at friends' places, but it didn't matter. Whatever was in that house wasn't bound by walls. It followed us. One time we stayed at a motel, and in the middle of the night, the bathroom light flicked on by itself. The mirror fogged over as if someone had taken a hot shower, but the water hadn't been touched. In the condensation, a word appeared, written by an unseen hand. Leave. That was the breaking point. Mark broke down, sobbing, saying he couldn't take it anymore. He admitted he'd thought about selling the house for years, but couldn't bring himself to do it. Now he had no choice. We moved out within a month. I went back to Ohio, too shaken to stay in Oregon. Mark rented an apartment closer to his job. The house still stands, but as far as I know, it's been empty ever since. Even now, years later, I'm never sure if what we experienced was tied to the house or to us. Sometimes late at night, I still hear whispers. Once I woke to see a shadow flicker across my bedroom wall, even though I live in a brand new apartment. I try to tell myself it's my imagination. But deep down, I know the truth. The thing about experiences like that is they don't stay neatly in the past. They linger, waiting, reminding you they're never really gone. And the worst part is not knowing if they ever will be. Story the end. It was late October when I first realized that something was off about the small town I had moved to. I had taken a job as a night security guard at an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. The building had been abandoned for years before the company I worked for bought it, and even after renovations, the place carried a heavy, almost tangible weight of past neglect. I was fresh out of college, broke, and desperate for work, so I didn't think much of it when the local townsfolk gave me those long, sideways glances. I shrugged them off as small-town suspicion of strangers, which was fair, I suppose. The first week was mostly uneventful, though the building itself was unsettling. The hallways seemed to stretch endlessly under the dim, flickering, fluorescent lights, and every door I passed looked like it could hide a dozen secrets. On my third night, I was patrolling the north wing, a row of storage units that hadn't been opened in decades, when I heard the faint sound of someone whispering. At first, I thought it was just the wind catching in the cracked windows, but the voice was distinctly human, low and almost pleading. I froze, straining to hear, but there was nothing. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" My own voice sounded foreign and small in the cavernous space. Nothing answered. The next few nights were similar. Occasionally, I would hear footsteps behind me, soft but deliberate, matching my pace exactly. I would spin around, heart hammering, only to find empty hallways stretching into darkness. My coworkers joked about the warehouse being haunted, but I brushed it off as nerves. I was new to night shifts, after all. It wasn't until the fourth week that I realized whatever was in the building wasn't just a trick of the imagination. I had been doing a routine check of the basement when I came across a small room that wasn't on the blueprints. The door was old, wooden, and warped, the kind that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. The air around it was cold, unnaturally cold, and I remember thinking I could see my breath despite the fall evening being warm outside. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pushed the door open. Inside was darkness, absolute darkness. But as I stepped in, my flashlight caught the edges of something written on the walls in a dark, sticky substance I didn't want to think about too closely. Words, names, dates, some from decades ago, some recent. And then I saw my own name scrawled at the bottom. My blood ran cold. I stumbled back, fumbling for the door, and slammed it shut behind me. I didn't sleep that night or the night after, haunted by the thought that someone, or something, was watching me. I confided in my supervisor, thinking there had to be some logical explanation. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone had gotten into the building after hours. He looked at me with a strange mixture of pity and fear. "You shouldn't have gone down there," he said, voice low. "Some places you just don't go." I pressed him, but he wouldn't say more, and I got the feeling he feared I wouldn't take the warning seriously. I didn't know whether to be angry or scared, but something in his eyes told me he knew far more than he was letting on. A few nights later, the incidents escalated. I started seeing movement out of the corner of my eye, shadows shifting in impossible ways, figures just barely beyond the reach of the flashlight. Sometimes the figure would disappear entirely when I looked directly at it. One night, while walking down the hallway near the loading docks, I saw a man standing at the far end, completely still. His back was to me, and he was dressed in old-fashioned clothes like something from the 1940s. I called out, "Hey!" and the man slowly turned his head. But he had no face, just smooth, pale skin where his features should have been. I stumbled backward, my flashlight clattering to the floor, and when I looked back, he was gone. After that, I started leaving little gifts in the hallways, pennies, scraps of paper, even a small notebook where I tried to write down what I saw. The next morning, I would find the items moved. Sometimes they were stacked neatly, sometimes broken, but always they had been touched. I began researching the warehouse. I found out it had once been a textile factory owned by a man named Elias Crowder. Crowder was infamous in town history, ruthless, secretive, and rumored to dabble in dark occult practices. Several workers had died under mysterious circumstances, most labeled as accidents, but some cases were never resolved. And oddly, most of the names on the walls in that basement room were former employees of Crowder's factory. The whispers got louder after that. They became voices, speaking in fragmented sentences I could almost understand. "Don't leave. Stay. Follow. We're still here." I began recording the sounds on my phone, trying to make sense of it all. When I played the recordings back in daylight, I could hear faint sobbing, scratching, and sometimes the unmistakable sound of someone breathing right next to the microphone. It wasn't just in the warehouse, either. I started seeing them outside. Shadows in my apartment window at night, fleeting figures in the parking lot, a man without a face walking past my car. I started avoiding friends, too paranoid to explain what was happening. Even driving through town, I felt eyes on me, and occasionally glimpsed pale faces staring from abandoned buildings. One night I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to stay in the warehouse until I found out what was happening. I brought a thermos of coffee, my flashlight, and my phone fully charged. At 2:13 a.m., I was near the basement door when I heard the whispering again. Louder this time. Clearer. "He sees you." I froze. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. The basement door creaked open slowly, though I hadn't touched it. I wanted to run, but my legs felt frozen. I felt drawn, like something was pulling me inside. I remember the cold, so much cold, it burned my lungs as I breathed. Inside, the walls were covered in names again. More recent ones this time, and as I scanned them, I noticed something horrifying. Dates. My own date of birth. And below it, a date that hadn't come yet. Tomorrow. My heart pounded. I stumbled back, trying to leave, but the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The flashlight flickered. I felt a presence behind me. I couldn't turn, couldn't speak. And then I heard it. My name, whispered, coming from every direction at once. I blacked out. When I woke, I was lying in my car in the parking lot. The warehouse was empty. The door was locked, normal, nothing out of place. My phone was shattered, the battery dead. I drove home in silence, terrified of the night, the shadows, everything I couldn't explain. The next morning, the local paper reported that a man had been found dead in the warehouse basement. Police didn't release the name immediately, but when I saw the photo, I nearly vomited. It was him, a faceless man, dressed in old clothes, lying in the corner of that hidden basement room. No fingerprints, no cause of death listed. Security cameras didn't capture him entering or leaving. I quit my job the same day. I moved out of town, sold my car, and tried to erase all ties to that place. But the faces followed me. The whispers never stopped. Every time I close my eyes, I see the warehouse stretching endlessly, the shadowy figures lining the halls, always watching, always waiting. Sometimes I hear them in my apartment, even though I live alone now. My mail is sometimes opened before I get it, though no one is supposed to have my address. My reflection in mirrors, I don't always recognize it. Months later, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a small notebook. On the first page was my name, scrawled in the same dark, sticky substance I had seen on the warehouse walls. I didn't open the rest. I threw it into a dumpster 2 blocks away, but the feeling of being watched intensified afterward. Every night I see the same faceless man in my dreams, standing at the foot of my bed. He doesn't move, doesn't speak, but I know he's waiting for me. I don't know why. I don't know what he wants. But I know that wherever I go, I can't escape. I tried telling my family, my friends, even therapists, but no one believes me. They say stress, exhaustion, paranoia. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And sometimes late at night, I can swear I hear someone whispering my name, soft but insistent, reminding me that I can never leave the warehouse behind. I moved again last month, far away, across several states. But last night, when I checked my mail, there was another package. Inside, a single folded piece of paper. On it was a date, tonight's date, and a simple message written in the same dark, sticky substance. We're still here. I locked all the doors, checked every window, and stayed awake all night. I don't know who we are. I don't know what they want. But I know they're coming. And this time, I don't think I can run. I've started keeping a journal, documenting everything. Footsteps when I'm alone, shadows that shouldn't exist, whispers that echo in the walls. I see the faceless man in my dreams every night, and sometimes, when I wake, I can feel him standing over me. I can feel the cold, the pull, the same cold that burned my lungs in the basement. I don't know how much longer I have. I don't know if writing this will help or if it's just a way to preserve my sanity before it's gone. But if anyone ever reads this, know that the warehouse is real. The faces are real. The whispers are real. And once they know your name, they don't let go. I've started seeing them in every reflection, in the windows, in the mirrors, even in the darkened screens of my phone. They move closer every night. I don't sleep anymore. I barely eat. I keep my lights on constantly, but it doesn't help. They can see me. They can always see me. I think about the hidden room, the names, the dates. I think about my own name written there, and the date that is now past but still looms over me. I think about the faceless man found dead in the warehouse, and I realize with absolute clarity that death isn't the end for them. It never was. Sometimes when I walk down a dark street, I see other faceless figures in the distance. I don't know if they're real or if my mind is breaking from fear and exhaustion, but I recognize the same cold, the same pull. I know they're connected to the warehouse. I know they've followed me, and I know they'll never stop. I have locked every door in my apartment, covered every window, and yet I feel them just beyond the walls, watching. I hear their whispers even in daylight. Their faceless eyes haunt me in reflections. Every day I fear that tonight will be the night they come for me. I don't know where I'll go. I don't know how I'll hide. I just know that I can't escape what I saw, and I can't undo what I know. If this is the last thing I write, let it be a warning. If you ever find yourself near the warehouse or a place like it, heed the signs. The cold, the whispers, the shadows that move when they shouldn't. And never ever go into the hidden rooms. Because once they know your name, once they mark you, it doesn't end. I hear them now, whispering just outside my bedroom door. Story the end. It was late October when I first noticed the strange noises in the house I had just rented in rural Pennsylvania. I had moved in for a new job in a small town that I barely knew, a quiet place where the streets were lined with old oaks and the occasional farm. The house was cheap, old, and charming in the way older homes can be: creaking floors, drafty windows, a narrow staircase that seemed to sigh under my weight. I was happy with it at first, enjoying the solitude and the quiet that city living had never offered me. But the quiet, I would soon learn, had a weight to it that I had never imagined. The first night, I noticed the scratching. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, or maybe a squirrel in the attic. The sound was soft, like nails dragging across wood, and it seemed to come from the ceiling above my bedroom. I listened for a while, trying to convince myself it was nothing, and eventually fell asleep. But when I woke up, I felt uneasy, a prickling sensation that made my hair stand on end. Nothing seemed out of place, but there was that strange feeling, like someone or something was just on the other side of the walls, listening. For the next few days, I tried to ignore it. The scratching returned at night, always soft at first, then gradually louder, more insistent. It seemed to move from room to room, never staying in one place for long. I checked the attic, the basement, even behind the walls and the closets, but I found nothing. No animals, no signs of forced entry, nothing at all. My neighbors were friendly but distant. When I asked about the house, they told me it had been empty for a while, ever since the previous owner had disappeared. Disappeared? I asked. They just shrugged. Gone. No one knows. Strange things, around here. I laughed it off, but their eyes were serious. It wasn't until the third week that the noises changed. One night I was sitting in the living room reading when I heard footsteps on the stairs. They were slow, deliberate, heavy, like someone was walking with purpose. I froze, listening. The steps stopped at the top of the stairs, directly above me. I called out, "Hello?" But there was no answer. I waited, heart pounding, thinking maybe it was just my imagination. Then I heard a soft thump, like something had hit the floor upstairs. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly made my way up, my mind racing with thoughts of burglars and intruders. But the hallway was empty. The bedrooms were empty. I even checked the closet, half expecting to find someone hiding, but nothing. After that night, I started noticing other things. Small, almost imperceptible changes in the house. Doors left slightly ajar, lights flickering when I passed. Objects moved from where I had left them. One morning, I woke up to find my kitchen table covered in what looked like scratches, deep, jagged marks that hadn't been there the night before. They weren't random. They formed letters, almost like a crude writing, but I couldn't make out what it said. I took pictures, thinking maybe it was the work of some vandals, but there was no way anyone could have gotten inside. I double-checked the locks, even installed extra bolts, but the house felt alive in a way I couldn't explain. I began keeping a journal, noting every strange occurrence. At first, it was just the noises and the movement of objects. Then I started noticing shadows, always at the edge of my vision, just out of focus. I'd catch them in mirrors or reflections in the windows, fleeting glimpses of something tall, hunched, and impossibly dark. Um, Sometimes I'd see it standing in the corner of a room, and when I turned to look directly, it would vanish. The scratching evolved into something worse. Whispers. Faint at first, almost imperceptible, like someone muttering from another room. But as the nights went on, the whispers became clearer. Words I couldn't understand, syllables that didn't belong to any language I knew. Sometimes I thought I could make out my name. I started having trouble sleeping. Every night, the sounds grew more persistent, more aggressive. The footsteps became running steps, sometimes accompanied by a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. One night, I woke to a scream, a long, wet, choking scream that seemed to come from inside the walls. I tried to ignore it, told myself it was a dream, but the scratches on the walls confirmed it wasn't. The marks had multiplied, deep, violent lines gouged into the plaster, forming shapes I didn't recognize but felt instinctively wrong. I called my parents, hoping to find some comfort, some rational explanation. They laughed at first, thinking I was joking. But when I described the sounds, the marks, the shadows, they stopped laughing. My father told me about the area, about the old town records he could access from his work at the local library. The house had a history I wish I hadn't known. Built in the 1800s, it had passed through dozens of owners. Most left quickly, some vanished entirely. There were stories of people hearing voices, of sudden, unexplainable deaths. One family in particular caught my attention. The Harrows, a family of 5 who had lived there in the 1920s. Neighbors reported seeing shadows moving behind the windows at night, and eventually the family disappeared without a trace. No bodies were found. The house sat empty for decades after that, until I arrived. After learning about the Harrows, the activity in the house escalated. The whispers became intelligible, speaking in broken English, repeating the same phrases over and over. Don't leave. Stay. It's hungry. Objects flew across rooms, slamming against walls. Doors would lock themselves, trapping me inside or outside at random. I tried to get help. I called local authorities, but when I explained what was happening, they laughed and told me there was nothing they could do about a haunted house. One officer, however, gave me a warning. Some things around here, they don't leave. They just wait. Be careful. One night, the presence became physical. I woke to the sensation of being watched. My chest pressed down as if someone, or something, was leaning on me. I opened my eyes and saw a figure at the foot of my bed. It was tall, thin, its limbs bent at angles that no human could manage. Its face was obscured by shadow, but I could see the faint outline of a mouth that stretched too wide, teeth jagged and glinting. I froze. It didn't move, just stood there, watching. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. After what felt like an eternity, it dissipated into the darkness. I stayed awake the rest of the night, gripping a kitchen knife, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The days blurred together after that. I stopped going to work, stopped eating, stopped answering calls. I was trapped in the house with whatever it was that had claimed it. Sometimes I thought I caught glimpses of other figures, small ones, like children, darting in the corners, vanishing before I could get a good look. I realized too late that the house had changed me. I was jumpy, paranoid, haunted by shadows even when I left. But leaving didn't help. I would drive away, only to return hours later, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't resist. The house was feeding on me, shaping me, breaking me down piece by piece. One night, I found writing on my bedroom wall, deep scratches like before, forming words I could read this time. Join us. I panicked, tried to scrub it off, but the words reappeared the next morning, etched deeper, darker, more urgent. I knew then that I wasn't just a visitor. I was being claimed. There was no escape. In a final act of desperation, I recorded everything. Every sound, every whisper, every movement. I left cameras in the hallways, on the stairs, in the attic, hoping to capture something tangible, something I could show to the world. What I saw on the footage made me sick. Shadows moving against the grain of reality, figures materializing and dissolving, the walls themselves pulsating as if breathing. One clip showed me asleep in bed and the figure at the foot of the bed, watching me, slowly bending down and pressing its face close to mine. The next frame, I was awake, screaming. I reached the point where I could barely distinguish reality from nightmare. The house spoke to me in whispers and scratching, in fleeting images and cold touches. It was alive, sentient, and it wanted me. I started hearing voices in my head, telling me what to do, how to move, how to act. Sometimes I thought it was the entity, sometimes I thought it was me. Either way, I was no longer in control. The last night I stayed, I barricaded myself in the attic, hoping it wouldn't find me there. But I heard it anyway, scratching at the floorboards below, whispering my name, calling me to join whatever it was that existed in that house. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke, the house was silent. The sunlight poured through the attic window, but it felt wrong, too bright, too clean. I crept downstairs, half expecting the shadows to strike. The house seemed empty. I left that day and didn't look back. I rented a storage unit for my belongings and stayed in a motel for a few weeks. But even now, I can feel it, a weight in the back of my mind, a cold presence when I close my eyes. I can't explain it, but I know it's still there, waiting. The house still stands, empty, creaking under the weight of its own darkness. People pass by, see a quaint old home, maybe think it's charming, but they don't know. They don't see the shadows in the windows, the whispers in the walls, the figures that move when no one is looking. I tried to tell people, friends, family, even paranormal investigators. Some believed me, most didn't. I've learned to stop talking about it. Talking about it seems to give it power. The only thing I can do is warn others in subtle ways in case they ever find themselves drawn to that place. Because if you hear scratching at night, if doors open and close on their own, if you see shadows at the edge of your vision, run. Don't try to fight it. Don't try to understand. Just leave. I know I wasn't the first to live there, and I won't be the last. The house claims its residents like one by one, shaping them into something it can feed on. I can still hear it sometimes in dreams calling me back, and I fear more than anything that it will succeed, that one day I will walk back through that door and the house will finally take me completely. Until then, I live with the fear, the knowledge, the memory of what happened. And I know that somewhere in Pennsylvania, in that old creaking house, whatever it is waits, waiting for the next person to arrive, the next soul to claim, the next mind to bend and break. I don't know how to stop it. I don't know if anyone ever could. All I know is that the house is alive, and it wants more than just space to occupy. It wants you. Story the end. It started the night I decided to take a solo road trip through rural Pennsylvania. I had just graduated college and wanted to clear my head, get away from the city for a while. I drove a beat-up old sedan, nothing fancy but reliable enough for long stretches of road. The first day was uneventful. I passed through small towns, stopped at diners, and camped out in a cheap motel off the highway. But that night, something happened that I still can't explain, something that has haunted me ever since. I had pulled into a small rest area around midnight. The place was deserted except for a couple of parked trucks. I got out to stretch to use the restroom and noticed a thick fog rolling in, even though the weather had been clear all day. The streetlights cast an eerie glow through the mist, and the trucks looked like ghostly silhouettes. I felt an odd tension in the air, like the quiet was holding its breath. As I was walking back to my car, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. A figure was standing by one of the trucks, barely visible through the fog. At first, I thought it was one of the truckers, maybe taking a break. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't moving naturally. It was just standing there, stiff, staring at me. I froze for a moment, heart hammering, before deciding to just ignore it. Maybe it was a mannequin or a trick of the fog. I got into my car, locked the doors, and tried to shake off the feeling of being watched. The drive resumed, but something was off. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I thought I saw headlights following me. I would accelerate, and the lights would mirror my speed. I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence. Maybe another car, maybe my imagination. But it kept happening. After a while, I couldn't see the lights in front of me, only the ones behind, perfectly aligned with mine. I decided to take the next exit and pull over at a small gas station. It was old, one of those places that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 1970s. The attendant was a middle-aged man, quiet and pale, almost like he had been there for decades. I asked if anyone had been following me. He gave me a strange look, then said, "You're fine. Just don't stop out there tonight." I frowned, confused, but he just shrugged and went back inside. I got back on the road, feeling uneasy, and that's when it started happening for real. The fog thickened until I could barely see 20 feet ahead. The car behind me had appeared again, headlights glaring. I tried to speed up, but the car mirrored my every move. I exited onto a smaller road, hoping to lose it, but the lights stayed behind me, unrelenting. My phone had no signal. I was completely alone. Then I saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it was a person, but as I got closer, I realized it was taller than a human should be, with elongated limbs and a head that tilted unnaturally. I slammed on the brakes, swerving to avoid it, but it vanished the second I turned the wheel. I tried to rationalize it, maybe a deer, maybe my mind playing tricks, but the sense of being hunted didn't leave me. I pulled into a small clearing off the side of the road, hoping to wait out whatever it was. That's when I noticed something carved into the trees around me. Symbols, almost like a ritual. I had studied a bit of folklore in college, and these shapes were vaguely familiar, tied to warnings about spirits or entities that preyed on travelers. My chest tightened with fear. I had no idea what I had stumbled into, but I knew I couldn't stay. I started the car again and kept driving, praying for the road to lead me back to civilization. That's when I heard it, the first words, a voice, low and guttural, whispering my name. I slammed on the brakes, but there was no one there. The voice didn't come from outside. It felt like it was inside the car, inside my head. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, repeating my name over and over. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The voice was everywhere. In a panic, I drove faster, ignoring the fog, ignoring the road. My tires skidded on wet leaves. My headlights cut through a wall of white, and every turn felt like I was going in circles. Then I saw headlights again. The car behind me had returned. This time I could see a figure inside, sitting upright but not human, face obscured by shadow. The headlights dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again, as if the car itself was breathing. I don't remember how long I drove like that, hours maybe, until finally I saw lights ahead. A town. Real buildings, signs, people moving. I pulled into a parking lot, heart hammering, and when I looked in the rearview mirror, the car was gone. Just like that, it disappeared. I sat there for a long time, shaking, trying to make sense of it. Eventually, I drove to a motel, booked a room, and didn't sleep that night. The next day, I tried to rationalize it all. Fog, exhaustion, paranoia. I convinced myself it was my mind, maybe some leftover stress from school, maybe too many horror movies. But that night, in the motel, I woke up to the sound of scraping metal against concrete outside my window. I looked out, and in the parking lot, I saw the car. Same model, same dark figure behind the wheel, staring directly at me. I blinked, and it was gone again. I left Pennsylvania that morning and never returned. I changed my route, avoided back roads, and tried to ignore the memory. But even years later, every time I drive at night on empty highways, I get that same feeling that someone is following me, watching, waiting. That foggy night, that figure, that car, it wasn't a dream. I know that now. It was something else entirely, something that exists on the edges of our world, waiting for travelers who are alone. Even as I sit here typing this, lights dim in my room, I can hear faint scratching at my window, soft footsteps outside, and sometimes, just sometimes, a low whisper repeating my name. I can't explain it, and I can't stop it. I've learned that some things don't stay in stories. They follow you, they watch, and they wait for the right moment. Story, the end. It started the summer I turned 22. I was working a seasonal job at a small marina on the shores of Lake Michigan. The marina was quiet most of the year, but during the summer it swelled with boats, families, and tourists. I was working the night shift alone, mostly checking docks, securing boats, and making sure the office and storage areas stayed locked. My coworkers joked that the nights were too quiet, too empty, and that the lake had a way of swallowing people whole, but I laughed it off. Ghost stories were for kids. The first time I noticed something was off, I had just finished a routine check of the docks. It was past midnight. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of water against the pilings and the distant hoot of an owl. I locked the office and walked back toward the parking lot, my flashlight cutting through the thick darkness. That's when I saw it. A man standing at the far end of the dock, motionless. At first, I assumed it was a fisherman or someone who had gotten stuck out late, but there was something wrong. He wasn't holding a fishing pole. He wasn't carrying anything. He just stood there, tall, thin, almost skeletal, wearing a dark jacket that glinted faintly under my flashlight. I called out, "Hey, you okay?" My voice sounded small in the night, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the man slowly turned his head toward me. No smile, no expression, just an empty, blank stare. I felt it before I saw it, a sudden, crushing weight in my chest, like the air had grown thick and heavy. My flashlight flickered, and when it came back on, the man was gone. I laughed nervously, convincing myself I had been tired, imagining things. I didn't see him again that night. Over the next week, sightings escalated. The man would appear in my peripheral vision while I was securing boats, standing silently at the end of a dock, or sometimes on the shoreline just beyond the lights. Whenever I looked directly at him, he vanished. My coworkers started noticing me jumpy, distracted, and I tried to brush it off. But it was affecting me. My dreams were haunted by him. The empty stare, the way he seemed to watch me from the foggy waters, just beyond reach. One night, around 2 a.m, I was walking back from the far end of the marina when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, flashlight shaking, and there he was, standing just at the edge of the light. Only this time he was closer than ever, so close I could see the faint shimmer of water on his jacket, as if he had been standing in the lake. I froze. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Then the footsteps began moving toward me. Not running, not hurried, just slow, deliberate. I don't know how long it took me to find the courage, but I finally bolted, running across the wet wooden planks, slipping and nearly falling multiple times. When I reached the office and slammed the door behind me, the man was gone. I called my manager the next day. He laughed it off, saying it was probably a local playing a prank. But then he asked, "Did you notice the footprints?" I frowned. "Footprints? Yes, there are no footprints on the dock where you said he was standing." I didn't understand. He showed me the dock, and indeed there were no marks, nothing, not a single impression in the wet wood. The man had left no trace. The worst came a week later. I was alone again, closing the marina, when I heard the sound of water splashing behind me. I turned. Nothing. I started walking faster. Splashing continued, now closer, circling around me, always just beyond the flashlight's reach. My heartbeat was thunder in my ears, my breath ragged. I felt hands brush past my arms. Not human, not real, but tangible. I ran to the office, locked the doors, and sat there trembling until sunrise. By that point, I knew this was something I couldn't ignore. I started researching local legends, talking to old-timers who had worked at the marina for decades. They told stories of people disappearing near the lake, of late-night workers seeing figures in the fog, of the Watcher, as they called him, a tall, thin man who haunted the docks and waters, appearing to those who worked alone at night. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence kept piling up. Every night, he grew bolder. Sometimes I'd catch him standing in my peripheral vision at the edge of the parking lot. Other nights, I'd hear his slow footsteps echoing behind me as I walked the docks. And when I spun around, he would vanish. I noticed that he seemed drawn to me, following me, waiting. One night after closing, I decided I had to confront him. I grabbed a flashlight and my phone and I walked the docks, calling out, "I'm not afraid of you. Show yourself." For a moment, nothing. Then the fog thickened, rolling across the docks in heavy waves, and I saw him, closer than ever. His eyes, if you could call them that, were empty hollows, dark and endless. He didn't speak. He didn't move quickly. He simply leaned forward just slightly, and I felt a cold, suffocating weight press down on me. My knees buckled, my flashlight clattered to the floor, and I could barely breathe. Then he was gone. No trace. Nothing. After that night, I couldn't stay. I quit my job, packed my things, and left the town, desperate to escape. But even now, years later, I can feel him. In the fog, in the shadows, in the quiet hum of water against a dock at night. Sometimes when I drive past lakes or rivers at night, I catch the faint shimmer of a dark jacket, a tall figure standing silently, watching. Always watching. I've tried to tell people, but they think I'm exaggerating. I've tried to ignore it, to convince myself it's my imagination, but I know the truth. He's real. And he's patient. He waits for the quiet, the lonely, the isolated, and one day, he'll come for me again. Story, the end. It was the summer after my senior year of college, and I decided to take a solo road trip across the Midwest. I'd always wanted to see the back roads, the small towns, the stretches of highway where you could drive for hours without seeing another car. I packed my old sedan with camping gear, snacks, and a tent, and hit the road. At first, it was exactly what I wanted. Wide open roads, quiet forests, and little towns where everyone seemed to know everyone. But by the third night, I realized I had misjudged just how isolated some of these places could be. I had driven for hours on a narrow two-lane road in rural Iowa with fields stretching endlessly on either side. My GPS signal had started to fade and the sun was sinking below the horizon. I spotted a small roadside campground marked on my map, with cabins and a tent area. When I arrived, it was nearly empty, just a single man at the office, sitting silently behind the counter. He didn't smile when I asked about a tent spot, and his eyes didn't quite meet mine. "Back there," he said, pointing toward a dense cluster of trees. "But be careful." I thought it was an odd thing to say for a campground, but I was tired and eager to set up. I pitched my tent in the clearing and settled in, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had been creeping up on me since I arrived. As night fell, I could hear the normal sounds of the woods. Crickets, owls, wind through the trees. But after a while, I started hearing something else. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate, crunching on the dirt. They seemed to circle the tent, always just beyond my sight. At first, I told myself it was an animal, or maybe another camper returning from the office. But the footsteps were too heavy, too measured, and they stopped whenever I tried to look out. Around midnight, I heard a voice, low and almost playful. "Hey, you there?" I froze, straining to hear. My heart pounded. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. Silence, then a faint chuckle. It was coming from just outside my tent. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the flap. The clearing was empty. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. I told myself it was a prank, or maybe my imagination. I tried to sleep, but the footsteps returned, pacing around the tent in a circle. At about 2 a.m., I was woken by a tapping at the tent. Soft, rhythmic, like fingernails on the fabric. I unzipped the flap again, flashlight in hand. A figure stood in the shadows of the trees. A man, tall, thin, wearing old, tattered clothes that looked decades out of date. His face was pale and featureless, smooth where his features should have been. I froze, paralyzed with fear. The figure raised a hand slowly and pointed at me. Then it vanished. I packed up immediately and drove back toward the office, but when I got there, it was empty. The building looked abandoned, papers scattered on the floor, cobwebs in the corners, and the man at the counter, gone. I checked the sign outside. The campground had supposedly been closed for years. My stomach sank. I realized then that the man who had checked me in had probably never existed, and that the clearing, the tent, the footsteps, I wasn't sure if any of it had been real. I drove through the night, trying to shake off what had happened. Around 4 a.m., I stopped at a gas station in a small town to get coffee and stretch my legs. Inside, the clerk gave me a long, uneasy look. "You shouldn't have been at Harper's," he said quietly, glancing toward the window. "People disappear out there." I asked what he meant, and he leaned closer. "That campground's been empty for decades. Every now and then someone shows up, and they never come back." My hands shook as I left. I drove for hours without stopping, terrified that whatever had been at that campground had followed me. And then I started seeing it. Shadows in the rearview mirror, figures at the edge of the road that disappeared when I looked directly. At a rest stop, I thought I saw a tall, featureless man watching me from the trees. I didn't wait to see if he was real. I drove away before dawn. For the next several months, I tried to convince myself it was a hallucination, exhaustion, or too many horror podcasts. But the footsteps returned, always in the periphery of my vision, the tapping at my bedroom window at night. And sometimes when I glanced at a darkened corner of my living room, I could see that pale, faceless figure standing silently, watching. I eventually stopped camping alone, stopped taking long drives, but I can't escape the memories. Sometimes I dream of that clearing, of the footsteps circling my tent, of the voice whispering my name. And sometimes, when I drive late at night, I see the headlights of a car behind me. When I glance in the mirror, there's no one there. But I feel it, watching, waiting, and I know that someday I won't be able to run anymore. Story the end. It was late summer when I took a job as a night security guard at an old manufacturing plant in Pennsylvania. The plant had been abandoned for nearly a decade, sitting on the outskirts of a small town, its windows boarded and its paint peeling like scabs on a wound. I had taken the job for the extra money. Graveyard shifts paid more. And because I'd been unemployed for months. At first, it seemed straightforward. Monitor the cameras, check the doors, and call the local police if anything suspicious happened. Simple enough. The first few nights were uneventful, just me wandering the empty halls and rooms filled with old machinery coated in dust. The silence was oppressive, though. Even in broad daylight, the plant would have felt eerie, but at night, it was suffocating. Each step echoed like a gunshot, and the occasional gust of wind rattling the metal siding sounded like a scream. My coworkers, when I called them during the day, warned me about the place. "You'll get used to it," one said, but there was a note of hesitation in his voice. "Or you won't." I started noticing little things almost immediately. Doors that were supposed to be locked were sometimes ajar when I checked them. I would hear whispers in rooms where no one could possibly be. Sometimes I would see shapes moving in the corner of my vision, but when I turned, there was nothing. I tried to rationalize everything: rats, drafts, old pipes, the wind. But there was a growing sense that the plant didn't want to be empty. One night, about a week into the job, I was doing my rounds in the basement. This area was the oldest part of the plant. Concrete walls cracked, rusted pipes dangling from the ceiling, and an overwhelming smell of mildew and decay. I had just finished checking the old storage rooms when I heard something behind me. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heavy. I froze, listening. The footsteps stopped when I stopped. I whispered, "Hello?" but got no reply. When I turned, nothing was there. The feeling didn't leave. I finished my rounds quickly that night, my flashlight beam shaking as I moved. On my way back to the security office, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure standing at the top of the stairs leading to the main floor. It was human-shaped, but its proportions were off. Long arms that seemed to drag on the ground, legs that bent the wrong way. Its face was obscured by shadows, but I could feel its gaze like needles piercing me. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it was fatigue, shadows playing tricks, anything to stop my panic. Then the voices started. Not whispers this time, but soft, insistent murmurs. They didn't form words I could understand, just syllables over and over, like chanting in a language I didn't know. I would hear them when walking alone in the hallways, sometimes coming from the machinery rooms, sometimes echoing in empty offices. I tried recording them on my phone, but when I played the audio back during the day, it was just static. A few nights later, I was in the security office monitoring the cameras when I saw it. One of the cameras on the main floor showed a figure standing perfectly still in the middle of the hallway. At first, I thought it was a homeless person or someone trespassing, Then I noticed something impossible. The figure's shadow moved independently of its body, twisting and stretching in unnatural ways. I blinked and it was gone. I checked every camera, but nothing appeared. I started to dread my shifts. The first time I considered quitting was when I went to check the loading docks around midnight. The doors were supposed to be locked, but they were open. The air outside smelled like smoke and something metallic. I stepped inside, flashlight in hand, and saw dozens of footprints on the dusty concrete floor. Not human. They were elongated, clawed, some too large for a normal adult, and they led from the doors into the interior of the plant. I followed them with my light, heart pounding, and they ended at the machinery room. Inside, something moved in the shadows. I don't remember running. I just know I was out the door, the cold night air burning my lungs, the prints vanishing as if they had never been there. I called my supervisor, told him about it, but he laughed it off. Old buildings, Michael. Shadows. You're letting your mind run wild. By the third week, I was sleep-deprived and paranoid. The plant seemed alive. The shadows shifted when I looked away, machinery hummed even when unplugged, and the whispers had grown louder, almost intelligible. I started hearing footsteps on the roof at times, though I knew no one had access. Sometimes I would feel something brush past me in the hallways or catch glimpses of a face pressed against a window where there shouldn't have been anyone. One night, I was monitoring the cameras when a new camera angle appeared on the screen, one I hadn't set up. It was pointing directly at me from somewhere in the office I hadn't accessed. And standing behind my chair was the figure. Tall, thin, faceless. I couldn't move. My body wouldn't respond. It raised a hand, long fingers stretching unnaturally, and I felt a cold pressure in my chest, like it was suffocating me without touching me. Then it vanished. I called Mark again. He's a friend who deals with weird situations, not the paranormal, just someone who doesn't dismiss things. He came the next night. Together we spent hours wandering the plant, trying to find where the camera had come from. We found nothing. But when we reached the basement, we saw something else. Scratched into the concrete floor, deep and deliberate, were words, "Get out." Not written with a pen, not painted, but gouged. Fresh. We didn't sleep that night. We sat in the car outside the plant waiting for sunrise. When it was light, I went back alone, determined to see if I could document anything. The cameras were all dead. The EMF meters fluctuated wildly, and the whispers started again, louder now, almost taunting. I felt eyes on me constantly, and every time I turned a corner, I saw them, figures standing just at the edge of my vision, vanishing when I looked directly. It got worse. One night, while doing rounds in the machinery hall, I saw dozens of the figures. Not shadows, not illusions. People-shaped forms, twisted, faceless, crawling along the walls, hanging from the beams, their movements jerky and unnatural. They moved toward me, slowly at first, then faster, almost gliding. I ran. I don't remember where I went, only that I ended up outside in the yard. My flashlight dropped, my heart racing. I looked back once and the figures were at the windows, pressed against the glass, staring. I quit the job the next day. I didn't care about the money. I left the town entirely, staying with a cousin in another state. But even now, years later, I can't forget it. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear the whispers in my own apartment. I see shadows that move against the laws of physics. I feel eyes on me, watching, waiting, and I know deep down that whatever was in that plant didn't stay behind. I've tried to tell people. Most dismiss it as fatigue, imagination, stress, but I know what I saw. I felt it, the cold, the pressure, the unnatural movements. And I can't shake the certainty that those faceless things follow those they choose. Patient, silent, waiting for the right moment. I don't drive past abandoned factories anymore. I avoid warehouses. Sometimes when the wind whistles through my new apartment, I swear I hear the faint hum of machinery and the soft shuffle of footsteps. And I know that one night, if I'm not careful, I might see them again. Those tall, thin figures, their faces smooth and empty, waiting just out of sight. I keep my doors locked now, always. And every time I hear a creak or a whisper, I remind myself, they are patient. They wait. They never forget. Story the end. It was a crisp November night in rural Pennsylvania, the kind of night where the cold seems to seep into your bones no matter how many layers you wear. I was driving back home from a long shift at a small diner on the outskirts of a town called Millbrook. The roads were nearly empty, winding through dense forests that blocked the weak moonlight. I had always hated this stretch of road at night. Something about the way the trees pressed close to the asphalt made me feel like I was being watched. That night, I was alone in my car. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but the road ahead and the occasional glint of road signs. About 30 miles from Millbrook, I saw her, standing on the side of the road. A young woman, maybe in her early 20s, wearing a tattered coat, her dark hair hanging limp over her face. She was completely still, staring at me with eyes that reflected the headlights like glass. Instinctively, I slowed down. My gut told me not to stop, but I did anyway, pulling over a few feet ahead of her. "Do you need help?" I called out through the rolled-down window. She didn't respond. She just stepped onto the road directly in front of my car, forcing me to slam on the brakes. My tires screeched against the asphalt, the car skidding slightly before coming to a halt. I jumped out, my heart racing, flashlight shaking in my hand. "Hey, are you okay?" I shouted. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was thin, barely audible, like it was coming from far away. "Please, take me home." "Where do you live?" I asked, glancing around. The road was desolate, no houses, no signs of life, just the forest and the fog that had started rolling in low across the pavement. I can't remember," she said. She looked confused, scared. Her eyes darted toward the tree line, as if something was behind her. "They're following me." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Who's following you?" I asked, but she didn't answer. Instead, she started walking toward my car. I gestured for her to get in, and she climbed in silently. She didn't speak another word. I tried to make small talk, but every word I said seemed to fall into a heavy silence. The radio static crackled, even though I hadn't touched it, and I could swear I saw shadows moving in the tree line, even though there was no wind. My car's heater was on full blast, but I felt ice running down my spine. About 15 minutes into the drive, I looked over. Her face had changed. The hair that had been limp now hung in stiff, angular strands, and her eyes, they were hollow, like dark pits. Her skin had paled, and the coat she was wearing was ripped and stained. She stared straight at me, not blinking. "You can't help me," she said, her voice hollow, almost like it wasn't her own. "They'll take you too." I slammed on the brakes. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely steer. "What are you talking about?" "Who?" She didn't answer. Suddenly, the temperature in the car dropped so fast I could see my breath. My headlights flickered, and when they came back on, I saw them. Standing on either side of the road, barely visible in the fog, were figures. Tall, dark, featureless, moving silently, gliding rather than walking. They didn't have faces, just voids where their eyes and mouths should have been. I panicked. I gunned the engine and drove as fast as I could, the car bouncing along the winding road. The fog thickened, and I couldn't see the figures, but I could feel them, like a pressure on the edges of reality. The woman in my passenger seat was whispering now, words I couldn't understand, but the tone, it was warning me, pleading. I turned onto a side road, hoping to lose them, but the trees seemed to close in, pressing closer, shadows stretching unnaturally across the asphalt. The figures reappeared, now closer, matching my speed, gliding alongside the car without effort. I could hear them in my peripheral vision, soft whispers like hundreds of voices speaking at once, yet completely unintelligible. Then, as suddenly as it began, they vanished. The fog cleared a little, and the road ahead looked normal. I stopped the car, my hands white on the steering wheel. The woman turned to me, her face human again, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. I'm free now." I asked her what she meant, but she just smiled, then disappeared. I looked all around. The seat was empty, no sign she had ever been there. I drove the rest of the way home in silence, shaking too much to even think. The next morning, I told a few friends about it, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was sleep deprivation, maybe the road's notorious for fog and hallucinations. But later that week, I found an old newspaper article about a young woman who had disappeared on that exact stretch of road decades earlier. Her name was Emily Harrison. Witnesses claimed she had been hitchhiking, and she vanished without a trace. Some drivers reported seeing her on foggy nights, asking for rides, only to disappear from the passenger seat mid-drive. I stopped driving that road at night. I still avoid it whenever I can. But sometimes, on nights with heavy fog and that low November chill, I can't help but wonder if she's still out there, waiting for someone to pick her up, still being chased by whatever had claimed her in the first place. A few weeks later, I started noticing small things. At home, I'd hear whispers when no one was there. I'd see shadows out of the corner of my eye, moving unnaturally. I would wake up with wet spots on my sheets, like someone had been crying in the room. And every time I drive at night, I check the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her there, staring back at me, silent and pleading. Sometimes I think I wasn't just lucky that night. I think she chose me, to let me see, to warn me. And maybe in some way I'm still paying attention to her, keeping her story alive, because the things that chased her that night, they're still out there too, waiting, watching. Story, the end. It started the day I moved into my first apartment alone in rural Pennsylvania. I just graduated from college and found a cheap one-bedroom in a small town just outside Scranton. The place wasn't fancy. It was old, a little drafty, with peeling wallpaper and creaking floorboards. But it was mine, and for a recent college graduate with barely a savings account, that was enough. I didn't know the previous tenant. The landlord was vague about it, just saying she had left suddenly and hadn't returned. That should have been my first red flag, but I didn't think much of it at the time. The first few days were normal. I unpacked, set up my small kitchen, and tried to make the place feel like home. I noticed that some of the floorboards in the hallway squeaked in a strange rhythm, almost like they were being walked on even when no one was there. I chalked it up to the apartment being old. Old houses settle and make weird noises, right? On my third night, I started hearing things. At first, it was subtle. The sound of doors creaking, soft thuds in the hallway, whispers so faint I wasn't sure I was really hearing them. I'd lived alone before, so I tried to ignore it. I told myself my mind was adjusting, that I was overreacting. The first real scare came about a week in. I was lying in bed around 2 a.m., scrolling on my phone, when I heard the faintest scratching sound from the kitchen. It wasn't the kind of scratching you hear from a mouse. It was heavier, deliberate. I froze and listened. It stopped. I figured it was the pipes or maybe a tree branch hitting the window, but my gut told me otherwise. The next day, I found small scratches on the hardwood floor near the kitchen entrance. They weren't deep, but they were definitely new. I called the landlord, who brushed it off, saying the apartment was old and these things happen. I tried to dismiss it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. A few nights later, the whispers got louder. I could hear them clearly, though I couldn't make out any words. They seemed to come from all around me. Low, guttural murmurs that made my skin crawl. I started sleeping with the lights on, keeping my bedroom door locked. I even considered leaving, but I didn't want to break my lease, and I told myself it was just stress. Then it escalated. One night, I woke to the sound of someone breathing heavily in my living room. My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed a baseball bat from under the bed and slowly crept toward the living room. The lights were off, but the shadows seemed thicker than usual. I could hear the breathing, slow and deliberate, moving from one side of the room to the other. I flicked the light on, swung the bat, but there was nothing. No one. The air was cold, unnatural. I stayed awake the rest of the night, too terrified to move. By morning, I found something I still can't explain. On my kitchen table were 2 glasses of water, filled to the brim. I hadn't poured them. I didn't know anyone who had a key. My landlord never mentioned giving anyone else access. Over the next few weeks, it kept getting worse. Objects would move. Chairs would be slightly out of place. My keys would disappear and reappear in odd spots. The whispers became voices, clearer now, angry, whispering my name in the dark. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of a figure out of the corner of my eye, tall, shadowy, with no discernible face. Every time I turned to look, it was gone. One night, I decided I had to confront it. I set up my phone to record audio while I slept. Around 3 a.m., the whispers started, louder than ever. "Get out," they hissed. The scratching returned, this time on my bedroom door. I could hear nails dragging across the wood, slow, deliberate. I bolted upright in bed and grabbed my bat. That's when I saw it, a dark figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was tall, impossibly thin, hunched slightly, with glowing red eyes. I froze, unable to scream. It tilted its head slowly, like it was studying me. Then, without a sound, it faded into the corner, leaving the room ice cold. The next morning, I didn't sleep. I packed a bag and left for a week, staying with a friend in a nearby town. While I was gone, I called the landlord, trying to find out who had lived there before. She finally admitted the previous tenant had disappeared without a trace. Police had investigated, found nothing, and eventually the case went cold. She didn't know why she hadn't told me. When I returned, I tried to ignore it, hoping the weeks of absence would have cleared whatever it was. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt it again, the heavy, suffocating presence, like eyes on my back. That night, I left every light on and slept in the living room. The whispers came, but the figure didn't appear. I tried recording again, hoping to capture something. The next morning, I listened to the recording. For the first 30 minutes, there was nothing. Then, faintly, I heard it. My name, over and over, whispered from the dark. And then, just as clear, the sound of someone breathing directly into the microphone. I swear to this day it wasn't me. I moved out the next week. I couldn't stay. I never told my friends or family exactly what happened. It sounds crazy, and I can't fully explain it myself. I've since read about similar experiences in that area, people disappearing, strange occurrences in old buildings, shadows that follow you. I don't know if it's the town, the buildings, or something else entirely. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night and feel that same presence, that same watching feeling. I don't know if it followed me or if it was just in that apartment, but I know one thing. I will never live alone in a building like that again. I don't know what it was, but whatever it wasn't human, and it didn't want me there. Story the end. It was late summer when I decided to take a road trip through the Appalachian Mountains. I wanted a few days alone, away from work, away from people, away from my apartment in North Carolina. I packed my car, loaded a tent and some camping gear, and aimed for a stretch of forest near an old logging trail I had read about online. People rarely went there, and I liked it that way. I wanted solitude, but what I found was far from peaceful. The first day was uneventful. I drove along winding mountain roads, the sun slicing through the dense canopy, casting long shadows over the asphalt. Birds chirped, the air smelled of pine and damp earth, and I felt good. I laughed at the thought that my biggest worry was getting a flat tire. I set up camp near a small clearing that overlooked a ravine. I was alone, truly alone, and it felt liberating. That night, as I sat by the campfire, I thought I heard faint footsteps on the gravel path leading to my campsite. I froze and scanned the darkness. Nothing. Just the wind. I told myself I was imagining it. The forest at night makes sounds you can't always identify. Maybe it was an animal. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of someone whispering my name. Not calling, not shouting, just whispering, softly, deliberately. I sat up, heart hammering, and looked around the clearing. Nothing. I shook my head, thinking I was hearing things, maybe dreaming with my eyes open. I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag and tried to convince myself it was just the wind. The next morning, I found something strange near the edge of the clearing. Footprints, human footprints, large, heavy, and bare. They circled my tent, stopping just at the entrance, and then continued toward the trees. I stared at them, frozen. I hadn't seen anyone pass by. I hadn't left the tent to make them. Whoever had done this had been watching me while I slept. I debated leaving immediately, but pride and curiosity kept me there. I figured if I stayed alert, nothing would happen. That day I went hiking, trying to distract myself from the growing unease. I kept hearing branches snap behind me, but when I turned, there was no one there. The forest was quiet, eerily quiet. Even the birds seemed absent. By the second night, the feeling of being watched had intensified. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I imagined a dark figure standing just beyond the firelight. I told myself again it was nerves, the isolation playing tricks on me. But then I heard it, a soft humming, almost melodic, coming from the tree line. It wasn't human, not exactly, but it wasn't natural either. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it into the trees. Nothing. I stayed awake most of the night, scanning the forest while holding a hatchet I had brought for protection. I caught movement several times, shadows flitting between the trunks, shapes that didn't belong to any animal I knew. My skin crawled. I thought about driving out immediately, but every time I looked at the road in the distance, it seemed further away. The woods didn't want me to leave. Around 3 a.m., I heard the whispering again, clearer this time. "Don't leave," it said. soft but urgent. I froze. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I shined the flashlight toward the sound, and a figure stepped forward from the shadows. Tall, hunched, featureless except for glowing amber eyes. It didn't run, didn't speak, didn't move like a human. It just stared at me, and I felt the blood drain from my face. I don't remember how I managed to get out of the tent. I ran blindly toward my car, tripping over roots and rocks. The figure followed, gliding silently behind me, never running, never slowing. I got into the car, locked the doors, and started the engine. The headlights caught it in the distance, standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me go. Its eyes burned like coals. I drove without looking back, down the mountain, my hands shaking, barely controlling the wheel. I stopped at a gas station in the next town. The attendant, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, noticed my state immediately. I told him I'd had a rough night camping. He nodded, said nothing, but I noticed the way he glanced toward the mountains. Then he said quietly, "You're lucky you got out. Not everyone does." I asked him what he meant. He hesitated, then said, "Some parts of these woods, they watch you. Some things live out there that aren't human. You see them once, maybe they let you leave, but not everyone's so lucky." I didn't sleep that night. I booked a motel far from the mountains and didn't step outside after dark, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing eyes in the shadows, heard the soft whispering, felt the weight of something waiting just beyond sight. Weeks later, I read about hikers who had gone missing in the same area. One body was found partially buried near a ravine, mangled beyond recognition. Other reports were vague. Strange lights, fleeting shadows, people claiming they were followed. I couldn't tell if the stories were true or just rumors, but I didn't need confirmation. I had seen enough. I had felt enough. Even now, I can't pass by the Appalachian Mountains without feeling that tightening in my chest, that sense that something is watching. Sometimes when I drive at night through rural roads, I swear I see a figure standing at the tree line, glowing eyes reflecting the headlights. I tell myself it's a trick of the light, that it's my imagination. But I know what I saw that night. I know what I felt. And I know that some things in the forest don't want you to leave. They watch. They wait. And if you stay too long, they make sure you never do. I still get nightmares. The figure appears, sometimes standing at the foot of my bed, sometimes just outside my window, silent but unmistakably there. I wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, heart pounding. I keep a flashlight by the bed now, a knife, and I check the locks multiple times. But the fear never goes away. You can't outrun something that's patient, something that waits. A friend once asked me why I even went to those mountains, why I didn't listen to the warnings. I told him I was curious, that I wanted solitude. He looked at me with a mix of pity and fear. "Curiosity gets people killed," he said. I didn't respond. I already knew the truth of it. The Appalachian forests are beautiful, yes, but some beauty hides things you don't understand. Things that move silently, unseen. Things that can watch without being seen, wait without being noticed. I learned that the hard way. I will never go back. I will never camp alone again. And I will never forget the eyes that watched me, the whispers that called my name, the figure that glided through the trees with a patience that was terrifying in its certainty. Some things are real, some things are patient. And some things wait for you in the dark, knowing you are alone, knowing you are vulnerable. Even now, years later, when I hear the wind in the trees, when I see shadows stretch unnaturally in my peripheral vision, I remember that night. I remember the glowing eyes. And I remember the whisper, "Don't leave." Story the end. It started when I accepted a temp job at a small storage facility just outside a rural town in Pennsylvania. I was fresh out of college, scraping together money to pay rent, and I figured it would be easy work. Lock and unlock units, keep the place organized, and monitor security cameras. The facility was old, almost industrial, with long rows of storage units, each with a heavy metal door that groaned when opened or closed. The place was surrounded by dense woods, and by the time I started, the sun set early, and the parking lot lights barely cut through the darkness. The first week was routine. I'd arrive in the late afternoon, check the office, make sure the cameras were functioning, and handle any customers who came by. Most days were quiet. Sometimes weeks would pass without a single person visiting the facility after dark. But there was always a weight in the air, a sense that something was off. I chalked it up to the isolation. I worked the graveyard shift from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m., which meant I was alone most nights. The building had a single office with a bank of monitors for security cameras. I would sit there, staring at black and white feeds of the empty rows of units. Every now and then, I'd see a shadow dart across a unit, but I assumed it was just a stray animal or a trick of the light. About a week into the job, I started noticing subtle things. A door would be slightly ajar when I was certain I'd locked it. Keys would go missing from the hook on the wall, only to reappear in places I hadn't touched. At first, I thought it was a prank. Maybe one of the regular daytime workers had a habit of sneaking in, but no one else was supposed to be there after hours. Then the noises started. At first, it was barely noticeable. Soft thumps, like someone tapping a heavy object against the concrete floors. Sometimes it came from the far end of the rows where the cameras had blind spots. I would get up to investigate, flashlight in hand, and find nothing but empty units. One night, I heard a low, dragging sound, as if someone or something was pulling a heavy crate along the ground. I ran down the rows, shining my light, but the units were all locked and empty. One of the strangest incidents happened on a particularly cold night in late November. I had been sitting in the office, watching the monitors, when I noticed a unit door slowly creaking open. I froze. I hadn't seen anyone on the cameras, and the door had been locked moments before. I grabbed my flashlight and went down the aisle. As I approached, I could see scratches along the metal frame of the door, deep gouges that hadn't been there before. My stomach sank. I called the manager in the morning to report it, but he dismissed it as wear and tear. After that, things became more aggressive. I began hearing voices, at first just whispers, unintelligible and soft, like wind through a narrow crack. Then they became clearer, sometimes calling my name. Jason, Jason. I'd freeze, looking around the empty rows, but no one was there. Objects began moving. A box would be tipped over, a crate slid across the floor, even though there was no one inside the unit. One night, around 3 a.m., I was doing my rounds when I heard someone calling from the far end of the rows. I rushed over expecting a customer or a coworker who had forgotten something, but no one was there. Then I saw it. At the end of the aisle, standing perfectly still, was a figure. Tall, hunched slightly, dressed in old, tattered clothing that looked decades out of date. Its face was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes, I can't describe the eyes. They weren't quite human. They seemed hollow, yet filled with a terrible intensity. I froze. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. I called out, but no sound came out of my mouth. My flashlight flickered, and when it came back, the figure was gone. I ran back to the office, locked the door, and sat there shaking until morning. After that night, I started sleeping in my car during the day, too afraid to stay inside the building. The phenomena escalated. The figure appeared more frequently, sometimes at the end of the rows, sometimes reflected in the glass of the office door. It would vanish the instant I looked directly at it. I started noticing scratches on my arms when I woke up, bruises forming overnight with no explanation. My coworkers began noticing I was pale and jittery, but no one understood why. I tried to quit. I told the manager I couldn't handle the job anymore, but he insisted I stay, citing my contract. I stayed for another week, each night growing more paranoid, more certain that the figure was stalking me, waiting for me to let my guard down. Then came the night I almost didn't make it out. I was walking down one of the aisles, checking unit locks, when I felt a cold, heavy presence behind me. I turned slowly, and the figure was there, closer than ever. Its face was inches from mine, eyes burning into me. I felt a pressure in my chest, as if the air had thickened. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. And then it whispered, "Leave, or stay forever." The voice was hollow, echoing, yet intimate, like it knew every fear I had. I bolted. I ran down the aisles, tripping over crates, heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. I reached the office, slammed the door, and called the local police. When they arrived, the building was empty, the figure gone, but they found signs of disturbance. Deep scratches along the floors, walls, and unit doors. The officers looked at me like I was insane. I didn't care. I quit that night and never returned. Years later, I discovered the history of the storage facility. Decades ago, it had been a textile factory. A fire had broken out one night, trapping several workers inside. Many died. Some bodies were never recovered. Workers reported strange occurrences even then: whispers in the halls, tools moving on their own, shadows that didn't belong. After it was converted into a storage facility, the strange phenomena persisted. Employees came and went, some quitting abruptly, citing exhaustion or mental strain. No one stayed long. I moved to a different state shortly after leaving the facility. I've tried to put it behind me, but I still feel the presence sometimes. A fleeting shadow in the corner of my eye, a whisper when I'm alone in the dark. It's not constant, but I know it's still out there, patient and waiting. I can't explain why it didn't harm me that night, or why it seemed almost selective, but I know the warning was real. The scariest part is realizing that the world is full of places like that facility. Old buildings with memories, shadows that linger long after tragedy, presences that feed on fear. Most people never encounter them, and that's a blessing. But once you do, once you feel the weight of something that isn't alive yet watches you with intent, you never forget. You carry it with you. You feel it in empty rooms, in silent hallways, in the cold breeze that seems to follow you. I've learned to be cautious. I never work night shifts in isolated locations anymore. I research buildings before I enter them. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone, I still hear faint whispers calling my name. I've never returned to that town, but the memory of the figure, of its hollow gaze, lingers. I know it is waiting for the next person foolish enough to wander alone through those aisles, beneath the dim lights, surrounded by the forgotten things of strangers. No one believes me when I tell the story. They think it's stress, fatigue, imagination, but I know the truth. That facility was alive in a way that defies explanation. It wasn't just the building, it was what lingered inside, trapped by fire, time, and memory, and it never forgets. I try to sleep with the lights on now. I never walk through empty warehouses alone, and I always check the shadows, because somewhere, in some forgotten place, that figure still waits. And if it ever calls your name, don't answer. Story the end. It started in late November in the outskirts of Missouri, in a small town called Cedar Hollow. The town was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's business, and strangers were noticed immediately. Lucas, a 28-year-old graphic designer from St. Louis, had recently taken a remote work contract, which gave him the freedom to live wherever he wanted. After seeing an old listing for a small 2-story cabin on the edge of town, he decided it would be perfect for the quiet he craved. The cabin was modest, tucked away in a grove of oak and pine, with a thin gravel driveway leading up to it. The previous owner had left quickly and inexplicably, leaving the place mostly furnished. The first night, Lucas explored the cabin with a flashlight. Dust hung thick in the corners, and the air smelled faintly of mildew and wood smoke. The previous tenant had left old furniture covered in sheets, and the small fireplace looked like it hadn't been used in years. He noticed a faint scratch on the living room wall, high enough that it couldn't have been accidental. He rubbed it off as wear and tear. Lucas set up his laptop in the living room, the only room with enough light and space for his desk, and settled in for the night. Around midnight, he heard it, a low tapping on the window by his desk. Lucas froze, staring at the dark woods outside. The wind was picking up, and branches scratched against the glass. He tried to convince himself it was just the wind, but the taps became more deliberate, almost rhythmic. He grabbed a chair and cautiously approached the window. Nothing was there. The gravel driveway was empty, and the surrounding forest was still. He laughed nervously at himself and returned to his laptop. The tapping didn't stop. Over the next few nights, it became a nightly occurrence, moving from window to window. Lucas began noticing other strange things. His belongings slightly moved, his coffee cup found in the sink even though he hadn't touched it, and faint whispers in the hallways when he was alone. At first, he thought the cabin might be old, creaking and settling, creating strange echoes. But the whispers became voices calling his name, always in the middle of the night. One evening, he decided to explore the attic. He had avoided it because of its musty smell and the unstable wooden steps, but curiosity got the better of him. As he climbed, the temperature dropped noticeably, and his breath formed small clouds in front of him. At the top, the attic was empty, except for a small wooden chest tucked into the corner. The chest had intricate carvings, vaguely human shapes intertwined with vines. He opened it and found a pile of old, yellowed journals. Most of the entries were mundane, path detailing the previous owner's life, hunting trips, and letters sent to relatives. But one journal was different. It was written in a scrawled, frantic handwriting, detailing encounters with something in the cabin, something that watched at night, something that whispered from the corners of rooms. Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. The journal entries described the thing as a shadow that stretches, an entity that could move walls, walk without sound, and slip through cracks in doors and windows. The last entry was nearly illegible, but he made out a few words. It knows when you are alone. Don't sleep. Don't listen. Don't look into the corner. That night, Lucas set up his laptop to record audio and video while he slept. Around 2 a.m, the recordings captured the soft sound of breathing, too heavy to be his own. A shadow moved across the hallway, elongated and warped, gliding silently. He woke, but the hallway was empty. His bedroom door slammed shut by itself, leaving him trapped inside until he forced it open. In the following days, things escalated. Lucas began to notice scratches on his arms when he woke up, small but deep enough to draw blood. Objects flew off tables, lamps shattered, and at times he would wake to see figures crouched in the corners of rooms. One night, he awoke to the sensation of someone, or something, sitting on the edge of his bed. He tried to scream but couldn't. The presence leaned over him, cold and suffocating, whispering his name repeatedly. It vanished the moment he blinked. Unable to endure the terror, Lucas called the town sheriff, hoping for a rational explanation. The sheriff was an older man who had grown up in Cedar Hollow. He listened carefully, then frowned. "This isn't the first time," he said. That cabin, it's been abandoned for years because people can't handle staying there. Some leave and never come back. Some change. You've been warned." Lucas pressed for more information. The sheriff revealed that decades ago, a series of disappearances had occurred in that area, all of them connected to the small cabin at the edge of town. Families would move in, only to leave in a hurry, claiming the place wasn't right. Some townsfolk claimed they had seen shadowy figures at the windows at night, moving unnaturally, staring with eyes that seemed to pierce through the soul. The sheriff warned Lucas not to stay alone. This thing feeds on fear. The more you resist it, the more it watches, and the longer it waits. It wants to draw you in. Determined to leave, Lucas packed his things. But the night before his planned departure, he was trapped inside. The front door wouldn't budge. Windows refused to open. The shadows in the corners were no longer just shadows. They moved with purpose, half inching closer, whispering incessantly. He tried the back door, only to feel an invisible force slam against his chest, throwing him backward. Panic overtook him. He spent hours crouched on the floor, listening to the whispers grow louder, voices overlapping, chanting in a way that sounded older than the town itself. When morning finally came, Lucas found the doors unlocked. He didn't waste a second, loading his car and driving away, not daring to look back. The sense of being watched didn't leave him, though. On the long drive to St. Louis, he felt a cold breeze against the back of his neck, and the whispering lingered in his ears. That night, in his apartment, he couldn't sleep. Shadows moved in corners where no light touched. Objects shifted slightly when he looked away. Sometimes he would wake to see a tall, thin figure standing in the doorway, vanishing the moment he blinked. Months later, Lucas returned to Cedar Hollow to sell the cabin. When he arrived, the cabin appeared untouched, quiet, and still. The realtor assured him it had been empty for years. Lucas noticed, though, that the attic window was open, and in the window the shadows seemed to move, as if they had been waiting for him. He sold the cabin quickly, eager to put the place and everything associated with it behind him. But even now, late at night in his apartment, Lucas sometimes hears the faint tapping on the window, the low whispers in the hallway, and the feeling of being watched. He knows, deep down, that the thing he encountered at that cabin didn't stay behind. Some things, once awakened, never really leave. He avoids the woods at the edge of town, avoids small cabins, avoids being alone for too long, and every so often he receives an overwhelming sense of dread, the same chilling weight he felt in that cabin, reminding him that some presences are patient. They wait, watching, lurking in places where humans dare not look, And in those moments, Lucas knows the shadow is still out there, somewhere, waiting for the next person foolish enough to enter. Story the end. I moved to a small town in the Midwest after graduating from college, looking for a fresh start. The town was quiet, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, and I liked that. I found a house for rent just on the edge of town. It was old, a two-story wooden structure with peeling white paint and a sagging porch, but cheap. Too cheap, in retrospect, but at the time, I was desperate. The first night I stayed there, I felt an unease that I couldn't explain. The air smelled faintly of mildew and smoke, and the house groaned as if settling after a long day. I told myself it was just old wood and pipes, nothing more. I unpacked my boxes, made a quick dinner, and went to bed, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a scraping sound coming from the kitchen. At first, I thought it was a mouse or rat. I told myself to ignore it, that it was probably nothing. But the sound persisted, slow and deliberate, like someone dragging something across the floor. My heart started pounding. I grabbed a flashlight and tiptoed toward the kitchen. Nothing. The drawers were closed, the counters empty, and there was no sign of entry. I went back to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. I lay there listening. Then came the whispering. It was faint, almost too quiet to hear, but it was definitely there. Soft words, incomprehensible, like someone muttering under their breath. I froze. The whispers came from the hallway just outside my bedroom door. The next day I told myself I was imagining things. Old houses made noises. Shadows played tricks on you at night. But when I was making coffee that morning, I noticed marks on the kitchen floor. Scratches in the linoleum, long and thin, leading from the hallway to the pantry. I hadn't noticed them before, and they hadn't been there when I moved in. Over the next few nights, things escalated. I began hearing footsteps in the attic above me, pacing back and forth, heavy, deliberate steps that stopped right above my bedroom. Sometimes I'd hear a door creak open that I didn't have. One night, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom window sliding open slowly. The screen was still in place, but the pane had been slid halfway up. I slammed it shut and locked it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing outside watching me. I tried to tell people. I mentioned it to the local coffee shop owner, a woman in her 50s named Martha. She went pale and said, "Oh, you're in the old Henderson house, aren't you?" I nodded. She shook her head. "Don't be there alone after dark. Strange things have happened in that house. People hear things, see things. Never stay up there at night." I laughed nervously, thinking she was exaggerating. But that night, I heard the whispering again, louder this time. Clearer. "Leave, now." I jumped up, heart racing, and grabbed my phone. I was about to call a friend to come get me when I heard it, footsteps descending the stairs. Slow, heavy steps. The house had creaked earlier, sure, but this was different. It was intentional. I could hear the floorboards bend under weight, coming closer, closer. I bolted out of my room and ran to the front door. I tried to open it, but it was stuck. Someone, or something, was blocking it from the other side. I yanked at it, screaming, and then it opened with a final push. I ran into the night, barefoot, down the unpaved road. The sound of footsteps followed me, keeping pace with my own. I didn't stop until I reached the main road and a passing car slowed to let me in. The driver didn't ask questions. I just got in, gasping and shaking, and told him to drive. I called the police, but when they went back to the house with me the next day, they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no disturbances of any kind. Just an old house, quiet, empty. I moved out that day and never returned. But sometimes, years later, when I'm lying in bed in a new apartment, I hear it. The soft whisper of my name, faint but unmistakable. And I remember the Henderson house and the feeling of being watched, followed, and trapped by something that was patient, deliberate, and waiting. I don't tell this story to most people because they think I'm crazy, but I know what I heard. I know what I felt. And sometimes late at night, I swear I can still hear the scraping of those heavy footsteps, moving slowly, methodically, just outside my door. Story the end. It started the night I decided to move into the old farmhouse just outside of rural Ohio. I had been living in the city for a few years, working long shifts at a factory, and I wanted something different, a change of pace, some space, quiet. I found the farmhouse online, cheap, surrounded by acres of fields and woods. The listing made it sound idyllic. creaky floors, a big fireplace, rustic charm. The realtor said it had been empty for years. That didn't bother me. I liked quiet. I liked being alone. The first few nights were perfect. The wind rustling through the trees, the way the old floorboards moaned under my steps, the smell of aged wood and dust, it all felt like peace. I had unpacked the bare essentials, no furniture except for a bed and a small table. Electricity worked, the plumbing was patchy but functional, and my phone actually had signal for once. It was perfect. Then the noises started. It was subtle at first. A floorboard creaking in the hallway when I was certain I'd closed all doors, a doorknob rattling gently, the faint sound of breathing that seemed to vanish as soon as I focused on it. I told myself it was just the house settling. Old houses do that. But then it got worse. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of tapping at my window. Not light, not the wind. I mean deliberate, rhythmic taps. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened. The sound stopped. I told myself it was a branch, a bird maybe. I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't. The next morning when I checked, the side window by my bed was slightly open. I remembered closing it. I didn't think much of it, but unease had started to settle in my stomach. It escalated quickly after that. Doors that I had locked were unlocked in the morning. Objects on my kitchen counter were rearranged. My coat was hanging in the living room when I had left it on the back of a chair in the bedroom. I thought maybe it was raccoons, but the things didn't make sense. Raccoons don't lock and unlock doors. One evening I was sitting at the table, laptop open, trying to ignore the creaking around me when I saw movement from the corner of my eye. A shadow slipping along the wall, just out of reach of the light. I called out, but no response. The shadow vanished. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow. I started checking every corner of the house before bed. Every time I thought I was alone, I wasn't. One night I woke to hear whispers. At first I thought I was dreaming, but the whispers were sharp, angry, distinct. They were coming from the hallway outside my bedroom. I held my breath and listened. Go, leave, now. I froze. The whispers stopped abruptly. I didn't move for hours. When dawn came, I checked the hall. Nothing, just the old wooden floorboards. I thought about leaving, but my car had broken down and the nearest town was miles away. I had no way out. Then came the figure. I woke up around 3 a.m., something pressing down on my chest. My heart raced. I couldn't breathe. I opened my eyes and saw it, a figure crouched at the foot of my bed. Thin, pale, like a shadow with features. It had long, spindly fingers, and its eyes, black, empty, locked on mine. My body wouldn't move. I could only stare as it leaned closer. The air grew cold, icy, and I swear I could feel it exhaling on my face. I don't remember what happened next. I woke up the next morning on the floor beside my bed, the knife clutched in my hand. My door was wide open, the wind blowing papers across the floor. I packed what I could carry and left that same day. I called a tow truck for the car, went back to the city, but the feeling never left me. At night, I still wake up imagining that figure crouched at the end of my bed. I check the locks, check the windows, but the fear isn't rational anymore. It doesn't need to be. Weeks later, I called a friend who works in real estate. I asked him about the house. He hesitated. Finally, he said quietly, "That place, nobody stays there long. People say the last family just disappeared. Nobody knows how or why. The cops never found anything. The place has been empty ever since." I never went back. I don't even drive past it, but sometimes when the wind is right, I swear I can hear tapping at the window and a whisper that sounds like my name. Story, the end. I was 24 when I took a summer job as a night auditor at a small motel in rural Pennsylvania. It was one of those old 2-story motels with faded siding and a parking lot that cracked in every direction. The kind of place that seemed abandoned even during the day. I was drawn to it because the pay was decent for a seasonal job, and I liked the idea of quiet nights with nothing to do but check guests in and out, watch TV, and occasionally answer the phone. I should have known something was off the moment I first stepped in. The lobby smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cleaning chemicals. Behind the front desk, a large window looked out over the nearly empty parking lot, where a few cars sat, covered in dust. The owner, a woman named Mrs. Darnell, was in her late 60s, frail but sharp-eyed. She gave me a brief rundown of my duties and warned me about one thing. Don't let the housekeeper upstairs bother you. She's special. I laughed, thinking she meant eccentric. I had no idea what she actually meant. The first few nights were quiet. Guests came and went, leaving coins and tips behind. I enjoyed the solitude. The motel had a small row of rooms that had been boarded up for years, and I was told to never go near them. That made me curious, naturally, but I didn't go at first. About a week in, I started noticing things. Soft footsteps on the second floor hallway at odd hours, even though no guests were staying there. The elevator, one of those tiny rattling ones, would move on its own, lights flickering inside as if someone had pressed a button. I shrugged it off as old wiring and creaky floors, but a chill always ran down my spine. Then the whispers started. They were faint, almost beneath the threshold of hearing. I'd be walking to the vending machine in the middle of the night, and I'd catch what sounded like someone muttering from the hallway behind the closed doors. I never heard full words, only tones, sharp, urgent, and insistent. Sometimes it sounded like my name. One night, around 2 a.m., I was sitting behind the desk when I saw movement in the reflection of the lobby window. A figure was standing near the end of the hall on the second floor. I squinted, trying to see who it was, but the hallway was empty. I thought I was imagining it until I saw the shadow move again, and this time it shifted unnaturally, sliding along the wall. My heart pounded, and I realized the figure wasn't human. I called Mrs. Darnell in the morning and asked about it. Her face darkened. She told me a story I'll never forget. Decades ago, a housekeeper named Lillian had worked at the motel. She was known to be temperamental, but one night she disappeared. Her body was never found. Guests claimed they'd see her wandering the halls, and staff reported doors slamming on their own. Mrs. Darnell said she never left the motel, not really. Her presence lingered, and the second floor was her domain. She had a reputation for changing the behavior of anyone who stayed too long, anyone who wandered into her space. I laughed nervously, but inside I didn't feel relieved. That night, the footsteps were louder. They weren't pacing. They were deliberate, stalking. I heard a thump above me as if someone had dropped something heavy. I went upstairs to check, but the hallway was empty. Every room was dark. I swore I felt eyes on me, following my every step. The encounters escalated quickly. Items in the lobby moved. A cup of coffee I left on the counter would be on the other side of the desk. Pens rolled across the surface, stopping at the edge as if pushed by unseen fingers. Sometimes I'd hear the soft scuff of shoes pacing the halls while the parking lot remained completely empty. One night, a guest came in at 11:30 p.m., asking for a room. I handed him a key, but as he walked toward the second floor hallway, he froze. His face went pale, and he refused to go up. He said he'd seen someone standing at the end of the hallway watching him, but when I looked, the hallway was empty. That was the first time I realized it wasn't just me. The real horror started the night I was alone in the office. Around 3 a.m., the lights flickered and the temperature dropped. I could see my breath fogging the small window behind the desk. That's when I heard it, Lillian's voice. It was clear, commanding, angry. Leave. Now. I bolted out of the office and ran to the stairwell, but the second floor seemed endless. The hallway stretched farther than it should have, the doors twisting and warping in the dim light. Shadows moved in every corner. I could hear her whispering all around me, pressing against my mind, cold and insistent. I ran down the stairs, tripping twice, and when I reached the lobby, the doors slammed shut on their own. I was trapped for what felt like hours before they finally clicked open, and I stumbled into the parking lot. The next day, I told Mrs. Darnell I couldn't work there anymore. She nodded almost sadly, as if she understood. "She doesn't like people here," she said. "Once she picks up on you, it's hard to shake her." I left that motel and never went back. Even years later, I can't forget it. I drive past that stretch of highway sometimes, and I feel it, a weight in the air, a whisper in the wind. Some nights I wake up and see shadows flicker in the corners of my room, stretching unnaturally, moving like they're just beyond the edge of perception. I've learned not to look directly, not to speak. But I know Lillian hasn't forgotten me, and she's patient. She waits. Story the end. It was late fall in upstate New York when everything began unraveling for me. Though the events that followed felt less like they were happening in real time and more like I was walking through someone else's nightmare. The days were getting shorter, the air colder, and I was renting a small one-bedroom house just outside of town. It was the kind of house you'd drive past without noticing, tucked between two larger homes, with paint peeling off the siding and a half-rotted porch that creaked no matter how gently you stepped. I had just moved in a couple of weeks before, trying to get a fresh start after a bad breakup. I thought the isolation would do me some good, give me time to clear my head. But from the very first night, I started to notice things that didn't sit right. The first evening, after unloading the last of my boxes, I went to bed exhausted. Sometime around 2 in the morning, I woke up to what sounded like someone walking across the porch. At first, I brushed it off as an animal, maybe a raccoon or stray cat. But the steps had weight to them, slow, deliberate creaks as though someone was shifting their weight with each step. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, straining to hear more. It stopped suddenly, as if whoever or whatever was out there had realized I was awake. I told myself it was just nerves and forced myself back to sleep. The next morning, I went outside to check. The porch boards showed faint depressions in the dew, like footprints, though I couldn't tell if they were human or just the patterns of moisture sinking into the wood unevenly. I shook it off, made coffee, and tried to focus on unpacking. For a few days, nothing unusual happened. I got used to the quiet of the neighborhood. There weren't many kids around, no traffic at night, just the occasional barking dog. Then, one night about a week in, I heard something again. This time, it was inside the house. I had been asleep when a faint thud echoed from the kitchen. I froze, staring at the ceiling, listening. Then came another sound, like the scrape of a chair leg dragging across the floor. I grabbed the flashlight I kept on my nightstand and crept down the hallway, every step heavy with dread. When I reached the kitchen, the beam of light swept across the room. Everything looked normal. No overturned chairs, no signs of forced entry. But the back door was unlocked. I knew I had locked it earlier because I always double-checked. I locked it again and shoved a chair under the handle, then stood there for a long while, my flashlight trembling in my hand. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I finally went back to bed, but it took hours before sleep found me again. Over the next week, more things started happening. Small at first. Objects weren't where I remembered leaving them. The bathroom mirror fogged up even when I hadn't used hot water. Once I came home from work and the radio in the living room was on, crackling faintly with static, though I never listened to the radio. I tried to rationalize everything. Maybe I was just stressed. Maybe I was misremembering. But then one night, I woke up to the unmistakable sound of someone breathing in the hallway outside my bedroom. I held my breath, eyes wide in the dark, listening. Slow, steady inhales and exhales. It went on for what felt like forever before finally fading. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I told a coworker about it the next day. She gave me a strange look and asked if I knew the history of the house. I didn't. She said all she knew was that it had been empty for a long time, at least a couple of years. Some people in town avoided that street altogether. She wouldn't say why, just that weird things had happened there before. That stuck with me. That night, I sat in the living room with all the lights on, trying to convince myself I wasn't going crazy. Around midnight, I heard scratching at the front door, like fingernails dragging across the wood. Then came a knock. 3 slow, heavy knocks that echoed through the house. I didn't move. My whole body locked up with fear. Whoever it was didn't knock again. After a few minutes, I forced myself to peek through the curtains, but the porch was empty. The yard was still. No one there. The following days blurred together. Sleep became impossible. Every night I heard footsteps, breathing, or faint whispers that seemed to come from inside the walls. Once I woke to find my bedroom door wide open, even though I always closed it before bed. I started leaving the lights on in every room, but even that didn't help. I could still feel something watching me. The worst night came about 3 weeks after I moved in. I woke up gasping, like someone had been pressing down on my chest. The room was ice cold, my breath visible in the air, and standing at the foot of my bed, silhouetted against the dim glow of the hallway light, was a figure. It was tall, thin, its head cocked slightly to one side. I couldn't make out a face, just darkness, like a shadow darker than the rest of the room. I tried to move, but I couldn't. My body felt paralyzed, trapped in place. The figure stood there, silent, for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, it leaned closer as though peering at me. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. Finally, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The room warmed back up, and I could move again. I left the house the next morning. I couldn't stay there another night. I packed a bag and drove to a friend's place across town, shaking the whole way. I ended up breaking the lease and moving out entirely a week later, losing my deposit in the process. A few months later, I heard from someone in town that the house was empty again. The people who moved in after me hadn't lasted long either. One night, I drove past it. The windows were dark, the porch sagging even more. As I slowed down, I thought I saw something move in the upstairs window, a faint silhouette watching the street. I didn't stop. I pressed the gas and didn't look back. Even now, years later, I still have nightmares about that figure at the foot of my bed. I'll wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, convinced I'm back in that house. And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I swear I can hear breathing in the darkness beside me, steady and patient, as if waiting for me to notice it again. Story the end. It was late October, and the nights in rural Ohio had started to settle in with that sharp, almost biting chill that promised winter was coming. I was driving back from a late shift at the plant, the kind of monotonous 12-hour grind that leaves your brain foggy and your body aching. The fluorescent lights of the factory fading behind me like some half-forgotten nightmare. My car's headlights cut through the dense fog that had rolled in off the nearby river, and the radio, which had mostly been static, buzzed with an old country song. I was alone, completely alone, the kind of solitude that usually comforts me, but tonight felt suffocating. The road I was on was the sort of rural highway that stretches endlessly, flanked by cornfields that rustle in the wind like whispering ghosts. Every so often the trees would close in over the road, creating long, dark tunnels that made it feel like the world was swallowing me whole. I kept my foot steady on the accelerator, trying to shake off the tiredness pressing against my eyelids. I'd just turned onto an old, narrow side road that I usually avoided because it cut off about 15 minutes from the main highway. It was quieter, sure, but there was something about it. The way the fog lingered like it had a mind of its own, the way the shadows seemed to slither across the road. Still, I was tired, and the promise of home was enough to keep me going. It was about 10 minutes into that stretch when I saw him, or I thought I saw him. There was a figure standing on the side of the road, barely visible through the mist. My first instinct was to slow down, my rational brain telling me it was probably a hitchhiker or someone who had broken down. But then the figure stepped into the road and I slammed on the brakes. My car skidded slightly on the wet asphalt. The figure didn't move quickly, didn't run. It just stood there. Tall, impossibly thin, wearing what looked like a dark, hooded coat, and his face, or what little I could make out of it, was blank, empty, like a mannequin. I honked instinctively, but the figure didn't flinch. I shifted into reverse, trying to back up slowly, my hands shaking on the wheel. That's when I noticed the headlights behind me, another car far off but gaining speed fast. I panicked, thinking maybe it was someone heading straight for me, and I floored it forward, barely missing the figure, which seemed to blur slightly as I passed. I don't know how I made it through that stretch without hitting anything, but the car behind me, whatever it was, didn't appear to slow down. The headlights flickered like static, almost like they were alive. I finally reached the next junction where the side road met the highway and the car behind me vanished. Just like that. It wasn't a hill or a curve. It simply disappeared. I didn't stop driving until I pulled into my driveway, my hands shaking so hard I could barely get the keys out of my pocket. I didn't see anyone. Nothing, just the fog curling in around the streetlights, innocent looking as if nothing had ever happened. I tried to rationalize it. Sleep deprivation, my mind playing tricks. Maybe someone was just standing there, a weird hitchhiker or a prankster. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I could feel it, like a weight pressing down in my chest, the certainty that whatever I saw wasn't human. The next morning, I told my roommate Jake about it. Jake is the kind of guy who laughs at your fears and tells you you're imagining things, so I wasn't expecting much. But when I mentioned the other car that disappeared, he stopped mid-bite of his cereal. "Wait," he said, voice low. "You didn't see the truck, right? The one that follows you?" I frowned. What are you talking about? He leaned back in his chair, his face pale. There's been a series of reports. People driving late at night on that stretch. They see a figure in the road. Some of them report a car or a truck behind them that they swear is following them. But when they get to a safe place or call the cops, there's nothing. No record. No other car. Just nothing. Some say it's a ghost. Some say it's worse. I laughed nervously. Ghost truckers, really, Jake? He didn't laugh, he just shook his head. Don't laugh until it happens again. I didn't tell anyone else. Friends would have called me paranoid. I tried to put it behind me, but that night, sleep wouldn't come. I kept imagining the tall figure, the empty face, the headlights behind me. I got up around midnight to grab a glass of water, and the wind outside had picked up. The trees scratched against the windows like claws. And that's when I saw it. Outside the window, across the yard, standing at the edge of the fog, was the same figure, tall, thin, hooded, just standing there, motionless, and somehow it felt like it was staring directly at me. I froze, my body refusing to move, refusing to breathe too loudly. Then, slowly, it turned and disappeared into the mist. No footsteps, no sound, just gone. I didn't sleep. I didn't leave the house either. By morning, I convinced myself it had been my imagination. Maybe exhaustion, maybe paranoia. The following week, the incidents escalated. I began to notice small things. Doors I was certain I locked left slightly ajar. Objects moved from their places. Lights flickering for no reason. Sometimes I'd hear faint scratching noises on the walls, like nails dragging slowly. My roommate didn't notice any of it, or maybe he just didn't comment. Then came the night I stayed late at work. I was the last person in the plant, shutting down machines, cleaning up. The facility sits on the outskirts of town, and at night, it's completely isolated. I was checking a storage room when I heard a low, slow creak behind me. I spun around, flashlight cutting across the shadows, and there it was, the same figure, standing at the end of the aisle, motionless, watching me. I swear it felt like it was inside my head as much as in the room. I tried to call out, but no sound came out. My body refused to move. Then it tilted its head ever so slightly, as if acknowledging me, before dissolving into nothingness. The lights flickered violently, and I ran. I ran out of the plant, jumped into my car, and drove off without thinking of speed limits. On the way home, the radio went dead. Not a single station came through. Then I saw it again. The headlights in the fog behind me, the car I didn't recognize, moving too smoothly, silently, keeping pace no matter how fast I went. I took every turn, every detour I could think of, but it didn't matter. It stayed behind me, relentless. By the time I reached my street, it vanished. But the feeling lingered, the certainty that whatever I saw was still out there, waiting. Over the next few months, I became hyper-aware. I never drove at night alone. I avoided that side road entirely, and yet every so often I'd see glimpses. A shadow from the corner of my eye, a car far off in the fog that never seemed to move, a feeling of being watched, even in my own home. The breaking point came one night when Jake and I were sitting on the porch. It had been raining heavily, and the mist was thick, curling along the ground. I joked nervously about the ghost trucker again, trying to lighten the mood. Jake didn't respond immediately. He was staring down the street. "Do you see that?" he whispered. I followed his gaze. A figure was walking up the road, not running, not moving quickly, just walking. Tall, thin, hooded. And behind it, headlights, far enough that it seemed safe, but close enough that it felt threatening. The figure turned its head slowly, and I swear I could feel its eyes, empty and endless, boring into me. We didn't move. We couldn't. The figure stopped, raised a hand slowly, almost politely, and then it just vanished. Jake finally spoke, voice shaking. "We're not supposed to see them." I didn't understand. "Them?" He shook his head. "Not everyone. Just some people. They follow. They watch. And some of us notice too late." I never asked him to clarify. I never wanted to. But that night, sleep abandoned me entirely. Weeks passed. The sightings became more frequent. Every time I drove home late, every time I walked alone, I felt it, that presence, patient and unyielding. One night, my car's rearview mirror caught something I didn't want to see, a face pressed against the glass, pale and empty, just staring. My hands froze on the wheel, and when I looked up, the road was empty. I called the local police. They laughed at me. Probably a prankster or some fog playing tricks on your eyes. But the feeling never left. I started carrying a camera, recording everything, hoping to capture proof. The footage was always corrupted, blurred, or showed nothing at all. Then, one night, my neighbor disappeared, completely vanished. No note, no evidence, just gone. I saw him earlier that evening walking his dog, but when I went to check on him the next morning, nothing. The dog was found wandering the yard, unharmed. I told the authorities. They assumed foul play, but there were no leads, only a faint trace of fog lingering near his driveway, thicker than the rest, almost like it had weight. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up, lights blazing, and at 3 in the morning the figure returned. Not at the end of the yard, not by the road. It was standing just beyond the porch, too close to ignore. I grabbed a kitchen knife, my hands trembling, and I shouted. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch. It simply leaned forward, tilting its head, and then vanished. I moved out of that town shortly after. I couldn't take it anymore. I left my job, my apartment, even Jake, who begged me to stay. I packed everything into my car and drove for hours, miles stretching endlessly under streetlights and darkened highways. I eventually settled in a small town in Indiana, thinking I had escaped. But sometimes late at night I still see it. In the fog, on the side of a road, watching, waiting. And occasionally when I drive home from a late shift, I catch the flicker of headlights far behind me, always keeping pace, always patient, always silent. It's been over 2 years, and I've convinced myself that maybe I'm imagining it. Maybe the stress, the isolation, the fear, it's all in my head. But deep down, I know it isn't. And every time I hear the wind scratching against the windows, every time I see shadows out of the corner of my eye, I feel it. That same weight pressing down in my chest. That same certainty that it hasn't forgotten me. And I know, with a clarity that terrifies me, that one day it will catch up. Story the end. I moved to a small town in rural Ohio for a fresh start. Life in the city had burned me out, and I needed quiet, space, somewhere I could breathe without constant noise. I found an old 2-story house on the outskirts of town. The rent was cheap, and the landlord assured me it had been vacant for years. When I first walked in, it smelled of dust and old wood. The floors creaked under my feet, the windows rattled in the wind, but it felt peaceful. The first week was normal enough. I unpacked my things, fixed the creaky door hinges, and explored the surrounding property. The backyard was overgrown, with a broken swing hanging from a gnarled tree. I told myself I'd trim it later. Nights were quiet, except for the occasional sound of wind brushing against the old siding. But on the 4th night, I woke to the sound of whispering. It was soft, almost indistinguishable from the wind, but it was there. I sat up in bed, straining to hear. "Don't go," the voice said. I froze, thinking it was a dream, until the whisper repeated, clearer this time. "Don't go." My heart raced. I turned on the bedside lamp and searched the room. Nothing. I tried to convince myself it was the house settling or my imagination, but sleep was elusive that night. Over the next few days, strange things began happening. Objects would be moved slightly from where I left them. My keys would disappear and reappear on the kitchen counter. The fridge door would be open when I hadn't touched it. One evening, I saw a shadow dart across the living room wall, but there was no one there. The feeling of being watched never left me. I met one of the neighbors, an older woman named Mrs. Caldwell, while taking out the trash. I mentioned the noises, hoping for reassurance. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and fear. "That house isn't right," she said quietly. "No one stays long. Strange things happen. Disappearances, voices, shadows. You should be careful." I laughed nervously, thinking it was just superstition, but her expression made me uneasy. That night, the activity escalated. I woke to the sound of footsteps on the stairs. They weren't light, heavy, deliberate, and slow. I grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the hallway. The stairs were empty. I checked the bedrooms, the closets, even the basement. Nothing. But then I noticed deep scratches on the wooden banister, fresh, jagged, as though someone had clawed at it. Sleep became impossible. I started keeping a journal of everything that happened, documenting the whispers, the shadows, the movement of objects. One night, I woke to the sound of something dragging across the floor. My bedroom door was closed, but the sound came from inside. I reached for my phone to call the police, but the line was dead. The dragging continued until it stopped abruptly. When I turned on the light, the bed sheets were in a twisted pile on the floor, and there were long scratches across my floorboards. I tried to find a logical explanation. Animals, the wind, the house settling, but nothing fit. Then came the visions. Shadows at the corners of rooms, fleeting glimpses of figures standing just out of sight. Once, I saw a woman in the hallway, her face pale and hollow, staring at me with unblinking eyes. I blinked and she was gone. The whispers grew louder, forming words I could understand. Stay, forever, join us. My sanity began to fray. I stopped eating regularly, stopped leaving the house. The air felt thick, heavy, as if the house itself was alive, watching, waiting. One evening, I found writing on my bedroom wall. Deep scratches, forming letters that spelled, "You belong here." I panicked and tried to cover them up, but they reappeared the next morning, etched deeper and darker. I realized then that leaving might not be possible, that the house didn't just want me to stay, it wanted me to belong. I installed cameras throughout the house, hoping to capture evidence. The footage was disturbing. Shadows moved independently of light. Figures appeared and disappeared in the corners. One clip showed me asleep and a figure leaning over the bed, its face obscured by darkness. I screamed, and the footage stopped abruptly. The final straw came one night when I woke to someone or something touching me. My bedroom door was wide open and a cold presence filled the room. I could feel its breath, heavy and foul on my skin. The shadows in the corners began to move toward me, coalescing into shapes I could barely comprehend. I grabbed my keys and fled into the night, not stopping until I reached the main road. I stayed with a friend for a few weeks, trying to recover, but the house never left my mind. I can still feel it, a weight at the back of my thoughts, whispering, promising that it's waiting. I know now that the house isn't just a place. It's a predator, feeding on fear, on isolation, on those who enter. I warn anyone who might hear about it, do not go there. Do not move in. Once it chooses you, there may be no escape. I haven't returned. I've tried to live normally, but I hear whispers at night, feel shadows in the corners of rooms I'm in, and I know the house is still calling. It wants me to go back, it wants me to belong, and one day I fear I will. Story the end. It started on a Tuesday evening in early October when the sky had that low, oppressive gray that makes every shadow feel deeper than it is. I was working late at the electronics warehouse in the outskirts of Detroit, a job I'd taken mostly because it paid enough to cover rent and utilities. The warehouse was massive, filled with rows of shelves that climbed impossibly high, stacked with TVs, stereos, and computer parts. The fluorescent lights flickered occasionally, a trait the building had kept since the early 80s, and every time one buzzed or went dim, it made the cavernous space feel smaller, like it was closing in. I was the only one there, apart from the night supervisor, a guy named Greg, who liked to hover in the corner office, watching the security monitors and drinking coffee until dawn. That night, everything seemed normal at first. The hum of the refrigerators in the electronics section, the soft whir of a security camera motor turning, the occasional squeak of the forklift as it rolled across the concrete floor. It was all normal. I was in aisle 14, checking inventory on a shipment of audio receivers that had come in that morning. I remember thinking about the silence, about how every sound echoed back at me in the empty warehouse. The kind of silence that makes your own heartbeat feel too loud. I noticed it when the walkie-talkie on my belt crackled. It wasn't Greg, it wasn't anyone. It was static at first, but then I heard a voice, a woman's voice, soft, almost whispering, but unmistakable. "Help me," it said. I froze. My hand went to my walkie-talkie, fingers trembling. "Hello?" I said, my voice echoing against the metal shelves. Nothing, just static again. I told myself it was the equipment, interference from the old wiring. But it sounded so real, so close, like someone was standing right next to me, speaking just under their breath. I walked back toward the main office, trying to laugh it off. Maybe someone had left a phone on or a recording had triggered. Greg was in his office, a small fluorescent light casting a yellowish glow through the blinds. "Hey, Greg," I said, trying to sound casual. "You hear that weird static? I swear I thought I heard someone talking on the walkie." Greg didn't look up from his monitor. "Don't worry about it," he said. His voice had that flat monotone you get from people who've seen and heard everything. "Sometimes the lines cross. You're alone in that section, right?" "Yeah," I said, suddenly aware of the isolation. But it sounded like someone's voice, a woman's voice. Greg finally looked at me, and there was a brief flicker of unease in his eyes. Don't pay attention to it, he said, returning his gaze to the monitors. That small moment, that hesitation, made my stomach turn. I decided to finish my shift quickly. As the night dragged on, the warehouse grew colder. I kept checking the inventory list, trying not to notice the shadows stretching unnaturally long across the floor. And then I heard it again, the whisper, clearer this time, coming from the far end of aisle 18. Help me, the voice repeated, urgent and low, but never loud enough to carry. I froze again. My rational mind wanted to dismiss it, to call Greg, to say maybe I was imagining things. But the sound was persistent. I tried the flashlight on my phone, aiming it down the aisle, and for a moment I thought I saw movement, like a dark shape shifting between the shelves. My heart thumped so hard I thought it might burst. I took a hesitant step forward, then another, flashlight shaking in my hand. The warehouse smelled faintly of dust and plastic, but beneath that, there was something else, a scent like iron, sharp and metallic, and I realized with a sinking feeling that it was blood. I stopped, shined the light around frantically. The shape was gone, but the whisper came again from the corner near the storage cages. Please, help me. I ran to the office and slammed the door behind me. Greg looked up sharply. What is it? There's someone in the warehouse, I said. I think they're hurt. Greg shook his head slowly. No one's supposed to be here. You're probably just stressed. I saw movement, Greg. I think someone's. My words caught in my throat when the monitors flickered. On one of the cameras, I saw her, a pale woman standing between the shelves in aisle 18. She was thin, too thin, with dark circles under her eyes. Her hair hung in wet strands over her face. She was staring straight at the camera, and then she disappeared. Did you see that? I yelled. Greg leaned closer to the monitor, frowning. There's nothing there. I wanted to argue, to scream, but the hairs on my neck were standing on end. Something wasn't right. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Text from an unknown number. Don't leave. Don't leave. She's watching. My hands were shaking. Greg didn't see the text. He was too focused on the screen. I tried to tell myself it was a prank, that maybe one of the day shift workers thought it would be funny to scare me. But I knew better. The warehouse had been abandoned at night for years. Only the security team came here after hours, and even they stuck to the office. I stayed there, glued to my chair, until around 2 a.m. when Greg said he needed to check the cameras on the loading dock. Stay here, he told me. I'll be back in 5. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. Then I heard it again, the whisper, louder now, coming from just outside the office. My blood ran cold. The voice wasn't saying anything else, just repeating, help me, over and over. I grabbed the heavy flashlight from the desk, feeling the cold metal in my hands, and slowly opened the office door. The warehouse was empty. No one there. Only the endless rows of shelves and the echo of my own breathing. But then I noticed something. Footprints in the dust. They weren't mine. They were small, narrow, and wet. They led from aisle 18 directly toward the office and stopped just short of the door. I backed into the office, slammed the door, and locked it. That's when the power went out. Total darkness. The fluorescent lights died with a flicker, leaving only the dim red of the emergency exit sign. I could hear soft footsteps moving outside the office. Slow, deliberate, and then a whisper right against the door. Please. I ran to the emergency exit, heart pounding, hands shaking. The door wouldn't budge. I could hear her now, moving around the office, tapping on the windows, whispering, crying softly. I screamed for Greg, pounding on the door. No response. And then I saw it, a shadow on the opposite wall, stretching impossibly long, a figure without a clear form, moving in ways no human could. It crept along the walls, paused, and then vanished. My mind screamed at me to get out, to escape, but the exit was locked from the outside. The whispering grew louder, more urgent. Help me. Help me. It was everywhere now, surrounding me. I felt like I was sinking into the floor, like the walls themselves were breathing in, closing around me. Panic took over. I pounded on the door again, shouting Greg's name. Finally, after what felt like hours, the lights flickered back on. I stumbled out of the office and ran to the main door, flinging it open. Greg was standing there, looking calm, holding his phone. Where were you? I yelled. He looked at me, confused. I've been here the whole time. I didn't leave the office. I showed him the footprints. The wet prints stopped in front of the office. Greg's face went pale. Those weren't there before. We called security. The next morning, a team came to check the warehouse, thinking maybe someone had broken in. Nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. The aisles were clear. The cameras had no recordings of the woman at all. It was as if she had never been there. I didn't go back after that night. I transferred to a different warehouse, and I stopped taking the late shifts. But I kept thinking about her. The pale woman, thin, desperate, trapped somewhere between the rows of shelves, whispering, always whispering. Months later, I found an old news article about a woman who had gone missing from a storage facility in Detroit in the early 1980s. Her name was Marlene Whitaker. She had been working the night shift, just like me, when she disappeared. They never found her body. The article mentioned that after her disappearance, workers reported strange noises, whispers, and shadows moving between the aisles. Everyone assumed the building was haunted. It was eventually abandoned. I realized then that the warehouse I had been working in, the one where I saw her, heard her, was the same one where Marlene disappeared. The whispers I heard, the footprints, the shadow, it had to be her. She had never left. Even now, I sometimes drive past the old warehouse long after it's been demolished. But I can't shake the feeling that if I stop too long, I'll hear her whispering again, asking for help, still trapped somewhere in the darkness, waiting for someone to notice her. Story the end. It started one rainy October evening in rural Vermont, in a stretch of road that locals called Hollow Pines. I had moved up there a few months earlier, taking a teaching job at a small high school and renting an old farmhouse just outside of town. The house was secluded, surrounded by dense woods on 3 sides and a clearing out front that led to the road. I liked the isolation at first. It was quiet, and I could focus on lesson planning and writing. But after a few weeks, I realized the kind of quiet I had moved into wasn't the pleasant, peaceful kind. It was the kind of quiet that makes you feel like someone is watching, even when you're alone. The first night I noticed it, I was unpacking boxes in the living room. I had the lights on, a small radio playing low jazz, and I thought I was perfectly safe. Then I heard it, a tapping on the window behind me. I turned quickly, but no one was there. I stepped outside to check the porch. Nothing, just the rain. I told myself it was probably a branch brushing against the glass, but my stomach twisted anyway. The next night it happened again, this time louder. I had gone to bed early, and at around 2 a.m., I heard soft footsteps outside my bedroom window. They weren't the scuffing kind that old houses make. These were deliberate, slow steps circling the house. I froze, listening. The radio was off. The house was otherwise silent. Then I heard a low scraping noise at the back door. I grabbed my phone, dialed 911, and waited. Nothing came. By morning, the footprints in the mud outside were gone. I tried to convince myself it was an animal. Maybe a raccoon, though the sound was too heavy, too purposeful. The local sheriff, a thin, gray-haired man named Daniels, was polite but skeptical when I called him. "You're out here in the middle of nowhere," he said. "Things move in the woods. It's probably just that. Keep your doors locked, maybe get a dog. That's all I can suggest." I tried to sleep after that, but the sense of being watched only intensified. I installed extra locks and even a cheap motion sensor light around the house, thinking maybe if I could illuminate the area, I'd feel safer. But light didn't help. Sometimes, when I would sit in the living room reading or grading papers, I'd catch a glimpse of a figure just past the tree line, a dark shadow that would disappear whenever I looked directly at it. A week later, something truly unsettling happened. I had just finished dinner and was washing dishes when I noticed my cat, a gray tabby named Milo, staring out the window. His fur was standing on end, his tail flicking wildly. I followed his gaze and saw across the clearing a man, or what looked like a man, standing completely still, facing the house. I couldn't see his face. It was like he was wrapped in shadows. I slammed the curtain closed, but I could still feel him there. I locked every door, every window, and slept with my phone in my hand that night. The next day, I told a coworker about it. He chuckled and said, "You're out in the sticks. People see things all the time, probably just a hiker or someone messing with you." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But I knew what I saw, and I knew what I felt. Fear isn't something you imagine. Fear is a weight in your chest, a vibration in the air, a certainty that something is wrong. A few nights later, the incident escalated. I was asleep around 1:30 a.m. when I was jolted awake by a sound I can only describe as breathing, slow, deliberate, right outside my bedroom door. My room had a solid oak door, one of those heavy old farmhouse doors. I grabbed my baseball bat and approached the door, trying to listen through the wood. The breathing stopped the moment I got close. Then came a slow, deliberate scratching on the door, nails dragging lightly across wood. I froze. It lasted maybe a minute, then nothing. I stayed in the room until sunrise, bat in hand, shaking, convinced that if I opened the door, whoever or whatever was out there would be waiting. I started leaving lights on all night, even in the dead of winter, and I stopped answering my phone after dark. But the intrusions continued. Footsteps outside, scratches on the door, shadows moving just beyond the tree line. Then things started moving inside the house. Small things at first. A chair slightly out of place, dishes that weren't where I left them. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Stress can make you see patterns that aren't there. But then, one night, I was in the kitchen pouring a glass of water when I heard a loud thump upstairs, like someone had dropped something heavy on the wooden floor. The house was empty. I lived alone. I climbed the stairs slowly, bat in hand. Nothing. But I could feel it. Someone had been there. Then came the voicemail. I hadn't given anyone my new number yet, not except for a few colleagues. But one morning, I checked my phone and saw a single missed call from an unknown number. I listened, a deep, rasping whisper. "I see you." The line went dead. I couldn't breathe. I deleted the message but kept the phone, hoping maybe it was a prank. But I didn't tell anyone. You don't tell people about something like that. They don't understand. The local sheriff again shrugged when I called, suggesting that I might be the victim of a hoax. "People do that," he said. "They call, they scare you, then they hang up." But the feeling in the house had changed. It wasn't just that someone might, it was inside too. I began to hear whispers when I was alone, faint, unintelligible at first, like static in my ears. But gradually I began to catch words, threats, sometimes my name, sometimes laughter, always close, just behind me. I stopped leaving the house after dark. I started sleeping with the lights on. Even then, I would wake in the middle of the night to heavy breathing, soft footsteps in the hallway, or the sound of my bedroom door handle rattling. One morning, I woke to see muddy footprints leading from the front door into the living room, stopping right at my recliner, and as though someone had been standing there watching me sleep. I called the sheriff. He came out, looked at the prints, and said, "Looks like some kids were messing around. Lock your doors." That was it. No further investigation. Months passed like this. I began recording audio at night, hoping to capture something tangible. One night, I played back a recording and heard something that made my blood run cold. A voice whispering just beyond audibility, "You can't leave. You'll never leave." I froze. That wasn't a prank. That wasn't someone talking through a speaker. It was too close, too immediate, too real. It reached a climax the night I almost left for good. I had packed a bag and was planning to drive to a hotel in the next town, just to get a night of peace. I loaded the car, left the keys on the counter, and went to grab my coat from the bedroom. The lights flickered. The air got cold, so cold my breath came out in clouds. Then I saw him, at the edge of the hallway, a dark figure, tall, featureless, except for the eyes which glowed faintly in the dim light. I froze, staring. The figure tilted its head like it was studying me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I dropped the coat. The figure stepped forward, then another step, then another. I bolted out the room, down the stairs, grabbed my keys, and ran. I didn't stop driving until I hit the highway, leaving the house, leaving Vermont. Even now, years later, I can't explain what happened there. People tell me it was stress, isolation, maybe a break from reality, but I've never had hallucinations before, and I've never had anything like this since. The recordings, the scratches, the whispers, the glowing eyes, it felt alive. It felt intelligent. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a prank. I don't think it was human. I moved across the country, started a new job, a new life. I don't live alone anymore, but I still get panic attacks when I hear footsteps at night, when the wind rattles a window, when shadows move in my peripheral vision. And I can't help thinking about Hollow Pines, that stretch of road, that farmhouse in the middle of the woods. I keep the news app open sometimes, hoping to see anything that confirms I wasn't crazy. Occasionally, there are reports, a missing hiker, a trespasser found dead in the woods, strange lights seen from the road. Every time I see them, my stomach twists. I don't go back. I've learned to live with the memory, with the fear, but I know the house is still there, waiting. Um, and I know, without a doubt, that it's still alive in some sense, still watching, still knowing. A few years after I left, a coworker who stayed in the area told me that the farmhouse had been abandoned again. They said the previous tenant had left in a hurry, doors unlocked, furniture scattered, like they had never intended to return. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. I already knew. Some things in this world are better left alone, better left unseen. Hollow Pines is one of them. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't left that night. If I had stayed, if I had confronted the figure, if I had gone to sleep. I don't think I want to know. I only know the fear, the sensation of being watched, the certainty that some things are not meant to be encountered. Some things are patient. Some things wait for you to be alone, and then they remind you that you never truly are. Even now, when I drive through rural areas, especially at night, I can't help glancing into the trees, imagining what might be standing there, waiting, watching. And I remember the voice from that night, whispering as I packed my car, "You can't leave. You'll never leave." I did leave, but sometimes in my dreams, I can still feel those eyes on me. I wake up sweating, shaking, and I know deep down that the memory isn't just in my mind. It's real. The fear is real. The presence is real. And somewhere out there in Vermont, Hollow Pines waits. No one believes me. That doesn't matter. I know what I experienced. I know what I felt. And I know that some things are not meant to be explained. Some things are not meant to be understood. Some things simply are. I don't talk about it often, and I don't bring it up casually. But every time I hear a story of a missing person, a strange sighting, or a house abandoned in the woods, I feel the old chill in my spine, the familiar tightening of my chest. And I know, without a doubt, that the house is still there, the figure is still watching, and Hollow Pines hasn't finished with me, or anyone else who dares enter. Even typing this now, I feel a shiver down my spine. I know it's just words on a screen, but the memory is alive. It doesn't fade, it doesn't forgive. Some things linger, waiting for their next chance to be seen, to be felt, to be remembered. And that's the thing about Hollow Pines. It's patient, always patient. Story the end. It was late October when my friend Jared and I decided to take a trip up to the mountains of West Virginia for a weekend. We had both been working long hours in the city and wanted to escape the noise, the people, the constant hum of our phones and computers. We didn't really care about hiking or sightseeing. Mostly, we wanted a cabin where we could just disappear for a couple of days and drink cheap beer while sitting in front of a fire. We found a listing online for a small, isolated cabin tucked into the edge of the Monongahela National Forest. It was a little rough around the edges, but that was part of the appeal. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, no distractions. It promised exactly the kind of isolation we wanted. We drove up Friday night, the highway twisting through the mountains in near total darkness. The headlights barely cut through the fog that had settled low in the valleys. Jared, who was driving, made a few jokes about ghost stories, saying the mountains were crawling with spirits of people who'd gotten lost or died back in the coal mining days. I laughed it off, but the closer we got to the cabin, the quieter it became. Even the sound of the car engine seemed to get swallowed up by the mountains. The cabin itself looked exactly like the pictures. It was small, log-built, and sat at the end of a long, dirt driveway lined with dense woods. The only other light came from a pale yellow bulb that flickered at the porch. Inside, it smelled like damp wood and old smoke. Dust lay in corners where neither of us cared to check. We dumped our bags, grabbed a couple of beers from the cooler we'd brought, and settled onto the sagging couch in front of the fireplace. The first night was uneventful. We drank, watched the fire, and talked about city life and jobs we hated. Around 2 a.m, I woke up with a feeling that someone was standing in the doorway of the living room. I sat up slowly, straining my eyes in the darkness. There was nothing there, just the dim moonlight falling across the wooden floor. I chalked it up to me half dreaming and went back to sleep. Saturday started with a hike. The air was crisp, the sky gray and heavy with clouds. We wandered a few miles down a trail that snaked through dense forest. Birds squawked somewhere above the sap, and we could hear the distant rush of a stream. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, how different it was from the city. But there was also something else, something off in the quiet. Occasionally, we'd hear a crack of a branch or a rustle, and when we turned to look, nothing would be there. At first, it felt normal, like animals moving in the underbrush, but by the time we returned to the cabin, I was a little on edge. That evening, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin windows. We drank again and made a fire in the fireplace. Around 10, I went to the small kitchen to get another beer, and as I opened the fridge, I thought I heard whispering. It was faint, almost imperceptible, and it sounded like a low, guttural murmur. I froze, listening. "Jared?" I called, but there was no answer. I stepped back and the sound stopped. I told myself it was the wind, maybe the fridge making noises. We decided to play cards to pass the time. About an hour in, Jared stopped mid-hand and frowned. "Do you hear that?" he asked. I didn't hear anything. He pointed toward the ceiling. It sounded like someone walking above us. I laughed nervously. "Jared, we're in a one-story cabin. There's nothing above us." He didn't say anything more, just shook his head and resumed the game, though he was unusually quiet. Around midnight, I was the first to notice the door. The front door had a small window, and I could see pale shapes moving outside. I thought maybe it was fog or shadows from the trees. I pointed it out to Jared, who swore he hadn't seen anything. We ignored it, went to bed, and tried to convince ourselves it was nothing. I woke in the middle of the night again, this time to a loud banging at the front door. My heart jumped into my throat. I shook Jared awake. "Someone's at the door," I whispered. He groaned, sat up, and grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand. We crept to the door and peered out. The porch was empty. Not a single footprint in the wet dirt. Nothing. The wind had picked up even more, and the banging sound had stopped. "Probably a tree branch," Jared muttered. I wasn't convinced. The next morning, I went outside to check for anything unusual. There were no footprints, no signs that anyone had been there, just the dirt, leaves, and mud. We tried to laugh it off, but a small knot of unease had formed in my stomach. We decided to drive down to the nearest town, about 20 minutes away, to get coffee and some supplies. The town was tiny, almost too small to have a proper gas station, but it had a general store with a few shelves of food and coffee. I noticed that everyone we passed on the street stared a little too long, their faces blank and pale. I mentioned it to Jared, but he said I was imagining things. Inside the store, an older man behind the counter barely looked at us. When I asked for directions back to the cabin, he didn't answer at first. Then, in a low, rasping voice, he said, "Don't stay there after dark." And that was it. No explanation, no reason, just those words. We drove back in silence. The sun had already begun to set by the time we reached the cabin. The forest seemed darker, heavier, almost suffocating. That night we stayed inside, drank, and tried to ignore the feeling of being watched. But around 11, the noises started again. At first it was footsteps on the porch, then scratching at the windows. I went to check, and the flashlight barely penetrated the darkness. I could see shapes flitting between the trees. Jared swore he saw a figure at the edge of the clearing, pale and thin, watching us. By 1 in the morning, we were both too scared to stay inside. We grabbed jackets and flashlights and decided to go for a walk down the driveway, hoping the movement would make us feel better. The woods were thick, and the beam of our flashlights barely reached past the first row of trees. I kept hearing whispers, soft and almost human, but we couldn't make out words. Then I saw it. At the far edge of the tree line, a figure standing still, unnaturally tall and thin, completely black against the dim moonlight. I froze. Jared shone his flashlight toward it, and it vanished. Just like that. We ran back to the cabin and locked every door and window. That night, I hardly slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I saw that figure in the shadows, always watching, always just out of reach. Around 3 in the morning, I heard the front door creak. Someone, or something, was opening it from the outside. I grabbed a baseball bat we'd brought along for protection and crept toward the living room. The door was wide open, swinging slightly in the wind. We had locked it before bed. We bolted into the car and didn't stop until we reached the highway. Driving through the mountains, we didn't speak, didn't turn on the radio, didn't even look at each other. When we finally reached a town with gas and lights, Jared pulled over. "We're not going back," he said. I I agreed, though part of me felt guilty leaving our things behind. But neither of us could explain what we had seen, and neither of us wanted to. Weeks later, I tried to find information about the cabin online. The listing was gone, and no records existed of anyone owning property there. It was as if the place had never been listed, never existed at all. Jared and I have never returned to West Virginia, and we don't talk about that trip much. But every so often, when I'm driving alone at night, I swear I feel the eyes of something tall and thin following me, just beyond the light of my headlights. A few months after the trip, I got a call from a friend who worked in law enforcement in a small mountain town. He asked if I remembered the cabin we stayed in. I said yes, and he paused. Then he told me that over the past 5 years, several people had gone missing in that area. Tourists, hikers, people staying in cabins that weren't officially registered. None of them were ever found. He asked if I could describe what we saw. I told him about the tall, thin figure. He went quiet for a long time and finally said, "You weren't the first to see it, and you probably won't be the last." I don't know what that thing was. I don't know if it's human or something else. But I do know that I'll never go back to those mountains, and I'll never ignore the feeling that someone or something is watching from the trees. Even now, years later, when I lie in bed at night, I hear faint scratching at the window, and I see movement just beyond the trees outside. I've learned to leave the lights on, to keep my doors locked, and to avoid going anywhere alone in the dark. But sometimes I can't shake the feeling that one day it will find me again. And when it does, I don't know if I'll get a chance to run. There's something about the mountains, about the dense forests of West Virginia, that makes you feel small, exposed, and completely alone. I've never been able to explain why we survived that night, why the thing outside didn't follow us down the driveway, why it didn't step into the car. Maybe it had its rules, or maybe it was just toying with us. I'll never know. All I know is that the memory of that cabin, the eyes in the darkness, and the feeling of being watched stays with me every time I drive alone at night. Sometimes I wonder if the cabin is still there, hidden among the trees, waiting for the next unsuspecting visitors. And sometimes I feel that if I ever returned, I might not come back at all. But even the thought of going near that place makes the hair on my neck stand up. There's a reason the mountains of West Virginia are so empty at night. There's a reason the locals don't talk about certain areas, a reason some roads seem to just disappear. Jared and I never went back, and we never spoke to anyone about that trip until years later. But we know what we saw, we know what we heard, and most terrifyingly, we know that it wasn't human. Something else lives there, something that watches, waits, and perhaps even follows. I'll never forget the look of it, tall and impossibly thin, standing silently at the edge of the trees, watching us like we were prey. Even writing this now, years later, I feel that same unease. I can feel it creeping back into my mind, whispering in the corners, reminding me that it's still out there. And maybe that's the worst part, that we were never alone, that we were never safe, and that the memory of it might never leave us. Story the end. I was 25 when it happened, living alone in a small, older apartment complex in rural Pennsylvania. I had recently transferred for work to a warehouse on the outskirts of Harrisburg, and the place was cheap, barely more than a room with a kitchenette and a bathroom. It wasn't glamorous, but I didn't care. I'd been living on my own for years, and solitude had always been comforting, or so I thought. The first few weeks were normal. I worked long hours, came home exhausted, and slept. The complex was quiet, the kind of silence that's almost unnatural. But one night, about 2 weeks after moving in, I woke to the sound of my front door creaking. My apartment had a thin metal door, old but solid, and I was certain I had locked it. I froze, listening. Nothing else. I chalked it up to the building settling. Then it happened again, 2 nights later. The door creaked open slightly, like someone had nudged it with their hand. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept next to my bed and swung the door open. Empty hallway. I checked every apartment door, but nobody was awake. I shrugged it off as paranoia. That's when the noises started inside the apartment. At first, it was small things. A drawer left open that I was certain I had closed, A glass moved a few inches from the counter, my shoes placed neatly by the door that I hadn't touched. I thought maybe I was just tired and forgetful, but then I heard footsteps, heavy, slow, pacing the living room at night, always when I was lying in bed. I never saw anyone, but the sound was unmistakable. One night, around 3 a.m., I woke to the smell of cigarette smoke. I hadn't smoked in years, and nobody else lived there. The odor was strong, thick, like someone was standing right beside my bed. I sat up, heart hammering, and froze. In the dim light from the street outside, I saw a shadow move across the far wall. Not a trick of the light. This was a figure, tall and thin, moving toward the kitchen. I grabbed my bat and called out, but no answer. The figure didn't vanish. It just stopped. I could feel it watching me. I don't know how long I stayed frozen, but when I finally mustered the courage to stand, the figure was gone. After that, I couldn't sleep. I installed a cheap security camera I had lying around, pointing it toward the living room and entrance. The first night, the footage showed nothing unusual. The second night, around 3:15 a.m., the motion sensor triggered. I watched, tense, as the door handle slowly turned, then stopped. A shadow passed across the lens, something humanoid, and then nothing. My apartment looked untouched, but the footage confirmed someone or something was inside. I didn't tell anyone. People would think I was crazy. I kept my routine, worked the night shifts, and tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more aggressive it got. Doors slammed shut on their own. My bed sheets were tugged at, like someone had been sleeping there with me. Once, I woke to find the words "go away" scratched into the inside of my bedroom door. I finally confronted it one night. I stayed up, waiting, bat in hand, every nerve on edge. Around 3:30 a.m., I heard the slow, deliberate footsteps again. I shouted, "Who's there?" and swung the bat at the empty air. The sound stopped, and then I heard it whisper my name. Not a normal whisper, raspy, wet, like it came from someone who'd been screaming underwater. I bolted to the door, unlocked it, and ran into the hallway. The building was silent, empty, the stairs creaking under my weight. I didn't stop until I reached my car. That night, I slept in my car, parked outside a 24-hour diner, fully expecting it to follow me. It didn't. I never went back to that apartment. I called the landlord, tried to explain why I was leaving, but he didn't ask questions. I packed everything I could carry and moved across the state. Even now, I get chills thinking about that place. Every time I close my eyes, I can hear those footsteps, feel the cold brush against my neck, and smell the smoke that wasn't mine. I don't know what it was. A person? Something else? I don't care. I just know that sometimes late at night, when the world is silent, I remember the way it watched me, and I can't shake the feeling it's still out there, waiting. Story the end.